The anime begins with our protagonist, Itsuki Tomonari, standing in awe before the enormous Kyu Academy, one of the top 3 schools in Japan. He knows that many of the students come from wealthy families, and that the academy is where the country's future leaders, such as prime ministers and corporate presidents, are educated. Despite the pressure, he keeps his composure. That's when he hears a girl greeting the famous and popular Hinako Konohana. As Hinako politely returns the greeting while carrying herself with effortless grace, everyone around them can't help but stare, praising her beauty and elegance. Meanwhile, Itsuki thinks she really seems like a completely different person. Suddenly, Hinako walks over to him and asks what's wrong. Caught off guard, he tells her that nothing is wrong, so she simply asks him to keep moving. Once they enter the academy, the other students begin wondering who he is, assuming he must be someone Hinako knows. Up until yesterday, Itsuki had nothing to do with a world like this, which is why he's still far from used to it. At that point, the story flashes back to the very beginning, where Itsuki finishes another exhausting shift working as a construction laborer. His boss tells him he's free to leave, and since today is his last day, he lets him know that his paycheck has already been deposited. Itsuki sincerely thanks him before heading out, while another worker remarks that the kid has a lot of guts. His boss agrees, pointing out that Itsuki juggles several part-time jobs, working from morning until night, and apparently pays for his own education. Itsuki explains that his parents loved drinking and gambling, so they were always broke. Still, he'd somehow managed to get by, at least until today. When he arrives home, he calls out his usual greeting, since he doesn't live alone, but there's no response from his parents. It doesn't surprise him though, because they had quietly slipped out in the middle of the night. That's when he notices a single note lying in the living room, with nothing more than a short message wishing him the best in life. At first, he thinks it's strange for his parents to say something like that, but a moment later, his expression freezes. Without wasting another second, he checks for the family's bankbook, only to discover that it's gone. The realization that his own parents have abandoned him leaves him completely stunned. He can hardly believe it's real. A little while later, he wanders outside and checks his pocket, finding that he has only 200 yen left. Knowing he still needs something to eat, he can't help but wonder how he's going to survive tomorrow. Just then, he's distracted by a group of female students walking nearby, recognizing that they're wearing the uniform of the prestigious academy on the hill. That reminds him that his own entrance ceremony is also tomorrow, but now he believes he won't be able to attend. After one of the girls says goodbye to her friends and heads off in a different direction, Itsuki watches her leave, thinking that they live in completely different worlds, before quietly continuing on his way. A few seconds later, he spots a student ID lying on the ground. He realizes it belongs to the girl he just saw, so he quickly rushes over to let her know she dropped it. The moment she turns around, Itsuki is stunned by how beautiful she is. But before he can say anything else, a van pulls up, and several masked men jump out, tie her up, and clearly attempt to kidnap her. Acting purely on instinct, Itsuki shouts at them to stop for a second. However, since they can't afford to leave any witnesses behind, the kidnappers take him along as well. After they're brought to an abandoned hideout where they're being held captive, Itsuki tells the kidnappers that he seriously doubts his parents could ever afford to pay a ransom. One of the men yells at him to shut up, explaining that he was only taken because he happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. With no way to escape, Itsuki can't help but think that first his parents ran away in the middle of the night, and now he's been kidnapped. It makes him wonder if he did something terrible in a past life to deserve all of this. Meanwhile, the kidnappers confirm that the girl really is the daughter of the Konohana family, making them realize they've hit the jackpot. After all, she's the heiress to the Konohana group. The moment Itsuki hears that last name, he turns to look at her and thinks that upper-class princesses really do exist. Not only is she incredibly beautiful, but she also carries herself with remarkable elegance. Suddenly, Hinako says she needs to use the bathroom. The request catches Itsuki completely off guard, but he figures it's only natural that she wouldn't act like her usual self in a situation like this. Besides, even high-class princesses are still human. However, Hinako then warns them that she's about to wet herself, prompting Itsuki to quickly beg her to hold it in just a little longer. When she completely ignores him, he has no choice but to tell the kidnappers, and in the end, they allow her to use the bathroom, though the whole situation is anything but graceful. Once everything finally settles down, Itsuki realizes that the impression he had of Hinako has changed quite a bit since the first time he saw her. One of the kidnappers asks the other if she's really a rich girl because she seems a little unusual. As if to prove his point, Hinako interrupts them to ask for tea and some sweets. The man simply hands her a bottle of water instead. Unable to deal with how spoiled she is, he tells Itsuki to take care of her. The moment Itsuki turns to look at her, he realizes she's spilling water all over herself while trying to drink from the bottle, so he scolds her. Hinako calmly explains that she's not used to drinking from plastic bottles. Without making a big deal out of it, Itsuki asks her to hand it over so he can help her drink. Before doing so, he points out that she's made a puddle on the floor and asks her to move a little closer. But the instant she tries, Hinako trips and falls flat on her face. Itsuki lets out a small laugh, not to make fun of her, and then asks how she managed to trip when there wasn't anything there. Once she gets back up, he checks her forehead and tells her she only scraped it a little. He advises her not to touch it too much, or it could get infected. Putting that aside, Hinako asks why he was kidnapped too. That reminds Itsuki about the student ID, so he finally returns it to her. her. After taking it back, she tells him that help will arrive soon because of it. Itsuki has no idea what she means, but Hinako simply lies down to get some sleep. Then, acting like the pampered girl she is, she asks if she can use his lap as a pillow. Itsuki immediately gets flustered. Having such a beautiful girl relying on him feels like something out of a dream. Then again, after getting to know her clumsy side, he doesn't find the situation nearly as overwhelming as he did before. Feeling much more at ease, he shifts over to give her some room, and Hinako gently rests her head on his lap, casually commenting that he's the perfect height. That alone is enough to make Itsuki blush. But just as the moment starts to feel romantic, Hinako interrupts it by asking him to sing her a lullaby. Itsuki tells her that he doesn't know any lullabies. While the two of them continue talking, a special tactical unit quietly moves into position outside under someone's orders. Meanwhile, one of the kidnappers is on the phone negotiating the ransom for the girl. Seeing how tense the situation has become, Itsuki can't believe Hinako actually managed to fall asleep. Still, knowing she's sleeping peacefully somehow helps him stay calm as well. At that moment, he gently wipes the drool from the corner of her mouth, and a few seconds later, she slowly opens her eyes. Suddenly, the kidnapper shouts into the phone, warning that if they keep wasting his time, he'll start hurting the girl. Even so, Itsuki tells Hinako not to worry. If anything bad happens, he'll use himself as a shield to protect her. Hearing that, Hinako asks why he would go that far for someone like her. The question catches Itsuki completely off guard, making him reflect on his own life. Even if his future is already hopeless, he can still save someone, and perhaps by doing so, he'll be saving himself as well. With that thought in mind, he answers by asking himself the very same question, as if he doesn't even know why he's willing to risk everything for her. His words make Hinako's eyes light up. She smiles and tells him that she likes him, that being around him is comforting, and that he smells like a futon that's been dried under the warm sun. She goes on to explain that she's always surrounded by caretakers, but they're all so strict. Because Itsuki treats her so naturally, she finally feels like she can relax, and that genuinely makes her happy. Itsuki is left speechless by her unexpected words. Hinako then asks for his name. He introduces himself as Itsuki Tomonari. Right after that, Hinako introduces herself as well, but just as she's about to say something else, a flashbang grenade suddenly crashes through one of the windows, instantly filling the room with thick smoke. After that, the order is given for the tactical unit to move in, and they quickly overpower the kidnappers. Since they also restrain Itsuki, he immediately tries to explain that he's one of the victims. The officers relay this to their second-in-command, Shizune, who serves as Hinako's personal attendant. Even so, she's suspicious of this unexpected situation. However, Hinako confirms that Itsuki isn't one of the kidnappers, so they finally release him. With that settled, Shizune walks over to check on Hinako and make sure she's unharmed. Although she apologizes for taking so long to rescue her, she also gently reminds Hinako to let someone know in advance whenever she wants to go out for a walk. Hinako casually replies that she simply didn't feel like doing that. Shizune chooses to ignore the comment and instead asks Hinako to leave everything else to the Konohana family's security team so they can head home as soon as possible. Before they leave, Hinako suddenly says that she wants this boy. Without hesitation, Shizune agrees to honor her request and tells her she'll begin making the necessary arrangements immediately, leaving Itsuki completely confused about what they're talking about. Later, inside the limousine, Shizune is genuinely surprised to see Hinako peacefully sleeping with her head resting on Itsuki's lap. At that moment, she finally understands why Hinako chose him. Meanwhile, Itsuki asks where they're taking him this time. Shizune simply replies that there's someone who wishes to meet him. A few seconds later, she receives a notification on her phone and informs him that they've finished investigating his background. She calmly reads off the results. His name is Itsuki Tomonari, 16 years old, an only child, and both of his parents are still alive. She acknowledges that it's admirable he managed to pay for his own education, despite growing up in poverty. However, she also knows that the previous night, his parents ran away after taking all of his money, leaving him in an extremely desperate situation. Itsuki is visibly shaken and immediately asks how she could possibly know all of that. Shizune simply tells him not to underestimate the Konohana family's information network. She then explains that he's supposed to start his second year at Ryugu High School tomorrow, but since he hasn't paid his tuition, he won't be able to attend. The news hits Itsuki like a truck as he realizes his education is about to come to an end. Shizune continues by informing him that he's also behind on his rent and utility bills. Hearing that, Itsuki concludes that it's only a matter of time before he ends up homeless. As grim as everything sounds, Shizune points out that this is exactly why they have a proposal for him. They want him to work for Miss Hinako. Itsuki's first assumption is that they're offering him a job as a maid. Shizune quickly tells him that's not the case. He then figures he must be talking about becoming a butler, but she shakes her head again. Just then, Hinako cuddles up even closer to him. Seeing that, Shizune coldly warns him that if he ever tries anything inappropriate with Miss Hinako, she'll personally make sure he loses a certain part of his body. After delivering the threat without the slightest hint of humor, she tells him that her employer will explain his duties in detail later. For now, all he needs to know is that they want him to become Hinako's personal caretaker. When they finally arrive at their destination, Itsuki is left speechless by the sight before him. Shizune casually explains that this is merely one of the Konohana family's secondary estates. As if that weren't enough, a large group of servants is already waiting outside to welcome them. As they walk through the estate, Shizune explains that the Konohana group is a massive conglomerate with interests ranging from banking to major corporations, with total assets worth around 300 trillion yen. She also mentions that Miss Hinako is the family's only daughter, and that this is her main residence. The moment they step inside the mansion, Shizune notices the stunned expression on Itsuki's face and asks if something is wrong. Itsuki tells her that nothing is wrong. It's just that their worlds are so completely different that it gives him goosebumps. Hearing that, Shizune tells him he'd better get used to it. If he ends up working for Miss Hinako, this will be his everyday scenery. That does little to reassure Itsuki though. After all, he hasn't even agreed to anything yet. They eventually arrive at the president's office, where the man introduces himself as Kagen Konohana, Hinako's father, and the president of the Konohana group. A moment later, Kagen quietly observes Hinako leaning against Itsuki while she continues sleeping, confirming that she's clearly grown attached to him. Only then does Itsuki realize that she actually fell asleep while standing up. Kagen remarks that it's unusual for Hinako to become so attached to someone she just met, and it seems his daughter has finally found the caretaker she's been searching for. Taking the opportunity, Itsuki asks what exactly a caretaker is supposed to be. Kagen replies that before he can explain, he wants Itsuki to get to know Hinako a little better. Suddenly, the lights dim and a large screen flickers to life. Itsuki watches a video showing Hinako during an ordinary day at the academy. As the footage plays, he becomes more and more stunned. More than anything, he's shocked by the unbelievable contrast between the Hinako he knows and the one on the screen. In the video, she behaves like the picture-perfect young lady, graceful, elegant, and flawless in every way. The difference is so extreme that Itsuki can't help but ask Shizune who that girl is. She calmly confirms that both of them are, in fact, the very same Hinako. Seeing how bewildered he is, Kagen explains that Hinako knows exactly how to act like the perfect young lady whenever she's in public, but that's only one side of her. Judging by the expression on Itsuki's face, Kagen assumes he met the other Hinako, the real one. Whenever she's away from the public eye, that's the side she always reverts to. As the video continues, Hinako is shown driving her caretaker to the brink with her impossible behavior. Kagen explains that the young woman in the video was Hinako's previous caretaker. Not long ago, she resigned after being hospitalized with a stress-induced stomach ulcer. Needless to say, that isn't exactly encouraging news for Itsuki. In short, Kagen explains that a caretaker's job is to support Hinako from the shadows and make sure no one ever sees her lazy side. With that out of the way, he asks Itsuki what he thinks, adding that it would be a tremendous help if he accepted the position. Although he's nervous, Itsuki has one very important question. Will I be getting paid? Kagen answers yes. He also tells him that he'll be living in the mansion and that all 3 of his daily meals will be provided. Finally, he offers him 20,000 yen per day. Itsuki's eyes go wide in shock, but Kagen mistakes his reaction for disappointment and immediately raises the offer to 50,000 yen a day. Itsuki quickly shakes his head and explains that it's the exact opposite. To him, even earning 8,000 yen in a single day is an incredible amount of money. With a much more serious expression, Kagen makes it clear that the responsibility of being Hinako's caretaker is far greater than Itsuki realizes. He then asks if Itsuki knows why Hinako always acts like the perfect young lady whenever she's in public. Without waiting for an answer, Kagen explains that it's all to help her find a suitable husband. Lately, the Konohana group hasn't been performing as well as it should. The company is facing numerous complicated issues, including internal power struggles and fierce competition from rival corporations. That's why Hinako's marriage is so important. To secure the family's future, they make sure she presents herself flawlessly at the academy and during every social event. In that situation, the caretaker's role is to support her behind the scenes. Simply put, it's a vital position entrusted with protecting the reputation of the Konohana family. Kagen then looks Itsuki straight in the eye and tells him that he's willing to pay whatever it takes. Itsuki understands that what Kagen is really asking is whether he's ready to take on this responsibility. After a brief moment of silence, Itsuki gives his answer. He says he'll accept the original offer of 20,000 yen a day. Kagen agrees and tells Itsuki that he'll start tomorrow. After all, Hinako gets lost even inside the mansion if her caretaker isn't with her. With that settled, he leaves the rest to Shizune. Before they leave the office, however, Kagen gives Itsuki one final warning. If you ever lay a hand on my daughter, I'll kill you. The blunt threat leaves Itsuki more than a little intimidated. A short while later, Shizune shows him to his room. She tells him that his uniforms have already been hung up and asks him to try them on later. She quickly clarifies that they aren't servant uniforms, they're Kyu Academy uniforms. Since Miss Hinako will be attending the academy, it's now his duty to attend as well. Itsuki is taken aback by the idea, pointing out that he's nothing more than a commoner. In response, Shizune hands him his new profile. According to the documents, he's now the heir to a technology company. She explains that, to avoid drawing suspicion, they've listed it as a subsidiary rather than a company belonging directly to the Konohana group. Even so, Itsuki worries about keeping up with the academy's curriculum, knowing the classes are on a completely different level from what he's used to. Shizune reminds him that his grades have always been outstanding, and if he's still concerned, that's exactly why she's here. here. Her reassurance helps ease the weight on Itsuki's shoulders. Shizune then apologizes for introducing herself so late. She formally introduces herself as Shizune Tsurumi, Miss Hinako's personal maid, and explains that she'll be responsible for training him as Hinako's new caretaker. Changing the subject, she hands him the caretaker's manuals. Right after that, she piles several textbooks into his arms, leaving Itsuki struggling just to hold the enormous stack. Shizune informs him that from now on, he'll be studying every day before dinner, and academics won't be his only training. She'll also be teaching him etiquette, as well as self-defense. That last part immediately catches Itsuki's attention, prompting Shizune to ask if he's scared. Itsuki simply shakes his head. After working so many physically demanding jobs, he's become quite confident in his own endurance. Soon, that confidence completely falls apart. Shizune effortlessly throws Itsuki to the ground, overwhelming him with her superior skill. After being slammed over and over again, he finally drops to his knees and begs her to stop, admitting that he's reached his limit and is genuinely afraid he's going to die. Seeing him in such miserable shape, Shizune decides to call it a day and compliments him on his hard work. Itsuki drags himself back to his room and collapses onto his bed, completely exhausted. That's when he notices that Hinako is already asleep beside him, giving him the scare of his life. The first thing he does is remind her that it's his bed. Still half asleep, Hinako casually replies that her caretaker's bed is her bed too. Faced with this unexpected crisis, Itsuki hurriedly opens the caretaker's handbook to see if there's anything about situations like this. Before he can find an answer, however, he receives a message from his childhood friend Yuri, asking if they're still going to school together tomorrow. Only then does he realize he never had the chance to tell her what happened. After thinking it over for a moment, he decides to explain that, for various reasons, he won't be attending their school anymore. The news is so sudden that Yuri immediately tries to call him, but Itsuki comes up with an excuse and doesn't answer. While he's distracted by his phone, Hinako suddenly sneaks up behind him and asks who she's talking about. Itsuki tells her that Yuri is his childhood friend and someone he used to attend high school with. After hearing that, Hinako calmly takes his phone away and confiscates it. Then she curls back up on the bed as if nothing happened, happily declaring that now peace has been restored. Itsuki has no idea what she means by that, and even when he asks for his phone back, she refuses. Hinako then tells him that she hates how formal he is when he talks to her, and asks him to go back to treating her the way he did before. Itsuki reminds her that Shizune specifically instructed him to behave that way. Left with no other option, Hinako gives him an ultimatum. If he refuses, she'll confiscate his phone forever. That threat is enough to convince him, and Hinako flashes a deeply satisfied smile. Itsuki still isn't entirely comfortable with the situation, but then Hinako gently smiles at him and says she's counting on him starting tomorrow. That sincere gesture is enough to warm his heart. Unfortunately, the moment doesn't last long. Hinako immediately lies back down on his bed and goes right back to sleep. Itsuki complains once again, but just like before, it accomplishes absolutely nothing. The next day, Itsuki is on his way to his first day of school at Gakuin with Hinako. Since nobody can see them in the car, Hinako keeps complaining, saying that she feels sleepy and that she wants to go home. Shizune warns her that if she says the same thing 8 hours from now, then she'll have to oblige. She then tells Itsuki that since this will be his first day accompanying Hinako at school, in public, she'll have to refer to him more formally. She mentions that she will drop them both off a short distance from the school, and it is imperative that nobody realizes that he's her caretaker, nor that he lives in the same residence. Itsuki listens attentively to everything she's saying, but Hinako interrupts them to ask him to talk normally. Since he seems reluctant to do it, Hinako asks Shizune to make him talk normally, but Shizune reminds her that it is important to maintain the facade before others. Having no other choice, Hinako asks her to allow him to do so just when they're alone or with her. Shizune ends up giving in, so Hinako smiles and tells Itsuki that he can talk normally with her now. Itsuki kind of relaxes after that and tells her that he doesn't really care about that, though Shizune doesn't look too happy about it. Hinako then complains as they get closer to the school because they're running out of time. With this in mind, she suddenly asks Itsuki to hug her, which causes Shizune to lose control of the wheel immediately. Once she calms down, she tells Hinako that is not conduct befitting a lady, so she should refrain from saying things like that. Hinako simply asks her if she knew Itsuki smells really good, and that actually surprises Shizune, so she asks him if he'll allow her to smell him after school. Itsuki refuses, of course, but Hinako takes the liberty of sniffing him as she pleases. Once they finally arrive, Shizune gives him something and tells him that she recommends that he use it if Hinako becomes intransigent. She then wishes them both a fine day, though the first thing Hinako says as they walk to school is that she wants to go home. Itsuki asks her if she shouldn't be getting into character already, but she simply tells him that no one's looking yet. The fact that she can tell even with her eyes closed makes him think she's got an internal sensor to detect when she's being watched or something, but he doesn't question it. Itsuki reminds himself that he's doing this for 20,000 yen per month, so he must protect Hinako's reputation as a lady while pretending to be her friend at this prestigious school. Despite how determined he is, Itsuki can't hide his shock when he sees how huge the school is in person, but he does his best to act natural. When he gets to his class, the teacher there informs everyone that they have a new student joining them today. Itsuki introduces himself to the class and takes a seat, surprised to hear no applause or active greetings at all. Despite Despite this, he senses a vibe in the classroom, a tolerance that comes from total confidence, not at all like the school he came from. Without wasting more time, the teacher decides to start out with math class, saying that they'll learn integration by substitution. Itsuki freezes for a second because that's usually end of third year stuff, but apparently they do it in spring of second year here. Because of this, by the end of the first period, he's already exhausted, but he makes sure to check on Hinako, who's clearly doing better than him since she's perfect in public. One of his classmates suddenly approaches him, saying that it takes some real gumption to show up and not even say hi to him. The guy tells him that he's ready to take his tribute now, but a girl chops him on the head and scolds him for scaring him. Just then, the guy laughs and apologizes, clarifying that it was just a joke. He introduces himself as Kazuya Taisho, and the girl next to him introduces herself as Karen Asahi. Kazuya mentions that it kind of seemed like he was struggling with the lesson back there, and Itsuki realizes he was very obvious. Kazuya reassures him and simply explains that it's classic transfer student stuff, so he shouldn't worry about it. Karen mentions that some of them come from other high-level schools, but most start coming here due to family circumstances, like to take over the family business. They're called the Ascended Commoners, and Kazuya assumes Itsuki is one of them. Before saying anything, Itsuki remembers Shizune's words when she told him that he should generally use polite speech at school. His backstory has him as a person of low status after all. Itsuki understands that an heir to a family business is an Ascended Commoner here, so he gets into character and uses a polite speech. He informs them that the IT company his family runs is a rather minor one, so he's part of what they call the Ascended Commoners. Kazuya tells him that it's rough to start up this curriculum from a normal school, so they came up with a kind of support group for students in the same boat. He mentions that both he and Karen are Ascended Commoners too, so they'll give him all kinds of help. Itsuki is a little touched by how kind they are, so he smiles and tells them that he'd be delighted to join them. Kazuya asks him to chill out with the politeness, since they're classmates, but Itsuka explains that it's his family's policy. Unable to do anything about that, Kazuya changes the subject, but his expression also changes drastically when he asks him what his relationship with Hinako is. The entire class awaits his response with a threatening aura, and Kazuya mentions that they came to school together today. Itsuki nervously explains that their parents are acquainted, so they've had a few interactions in the past, and she offered to walk him to school. Kazuya asks him if that's all, wanting to know if they're not engaged or something like that. The question takes him by surprise, so Itsuki denies it right away, which makes the mood go back to normal. Karen explains that everyone's got their eye on Hinako, and she's pretty much the biggest celebrity in the school since she gets the best grades in their year, and she's simply gorgeous. She heard she even takes lunch breaks to join her company's meetings remotely, which is to be expected from the Konohana heiress. Itsuki soon finds out that this rumor was a lie, since during lunch break, Hinako is actually waiting for him at the school's rooftop. Now that they're alone, Itsuki speaks normally to her and asks her if she always comes here. Hinako simply explains that it's a good place to be alone, and Itsuki admits it's nice to be outside as well. Once they sit down to eat, Itsuki is really surprised by the food, since he's never had such a generous packed lunch before. Hinako clarifies that the cafeteria's got better stuff, but with a packed lunch, she can only get the stuff she eats. Itsuki asks her if there are any foods she doesn't eat, and to his surprise, Hinako lists several things, like carrots, peppers, mushrooms, pickled plums, tomatoes, and pumpkin. The list goes on, but Itsuki interrupts her and assumes that she just doesn't eat vegetables. Hinako confirms it with no shame, and then opens her mouth, asking him to feed her. Itsuki is a little surprised at first, but he doesn't question her and simply complies. This makes her feel satisfied, but Hinako then decides to do the same and offers to feed him. Even though it makes him feel a little embarrassed, Itsuki accepts the food, and he's actually shocked by how good it is, since he's never had such a good rolled omelet before. Hinako is glad that he likes it and explains that he's her caretaker, so she has to feed him right, because she doesn't want him getting sick of her. After hearing this, Itsuki decides to ask her why her last caretaker quit, but Hinako just tells him that she doesn't know, and mentions that she had her for about 2 weeks. The one before her was 3 weeks, and the longest one was a month. Itsuki just wonders why they all quit so soon, since he can't imagine another job with perks like these. After all, they gave him a place to stay with 3 meals a day, a daily paycheck of 20,000 yen, and they're also paying his school fees. Hinako asks him what about her, wanting to know if he considers her a perk as well. Itsuki doesn't know what she means by that, so Hinako asks him if he doesn't want to marry up. That makes him clearly nervous, so he quickly explains that he hadn't thought about that. Hinako just asks him not to quit, so Itsuki accepts and lets her take a nap on his lap. While she sleeps, he thinks this should be a stimulating situation, but realizes it's actually weirdly soothing somehow. He suddenly gets a call from Shizune, who tells him that until he gets used to the caretaker work, she'll call him at lunch to check in. The first thing she asks him is if he's adhering to his assigned backstory, so Itsuki lets her know that he's managing for now. She then asks him if he's had any interactions with his classmates, and Itsuki lets her know about Katsuya and Karen. As soon as he mentions these names, Shizune checks the information she has and tells him that Karen's family makes their money in retail, a company called Jay's Holdings. Itsuki can't hide his shock when he realizes Karen's family owns the famous company of Jay's Electronics, which has risen to become one of the 5 top electronics retailers in the country. Now he doesn't understand why she said she was an ascended commoner too, since she's basically a princess. Shizune then informs him that Kazuya's family owns a large carrier company known as Taisho Movers. That's just as impressive as the last one, so Itsuki kind of considers them traitors now. After the following period, Hinako continues maintaining her perfect facade, and Itsuki notices that she's always surrounded by students, so he thinks he shouldn't worry much about her. However, Shizune calls him again just then, saying that Hinako apparently has dropped her wallet since the locations of her personal transmitter and wallet transmitter don't align. Itsuki is a little surprised that they put a transmitter on her wallet, but he doesn't question it and tells her that he'll look for it. Shizune informs him that the wallet is clearly on the west side of the main building, but she can tell him nothing more. Itsuki assumes it's probably in the bathroom in that case, so Shizune asks him to proceed with its retrieval and instantly hangs up. As soon as he realizes what that means, Itsuki immediately starts freaking out, wondering how he's going to retrieve something that is in the girl's bathroom. While he tries to figure out what to do, a refined-looking girl approaches him to ask him what the matter is, surprised to see a brand new face. She assumes he's the Class A transfer student she's heard of and introduces herself as Mirai Tennoji, the lone daughter of the president of the Tennoji group. Itsuki doesn't know what to say, and his clear confusion kind of irritates her since she doesn't understand how he could respond so anticlimactically after such a long pause. Feeling cornered, Itsuki apologizes for his ignorance because he's not familiar with the Tennoji group. Mirai can't hide her indignation, so she tells him that this goes far beyond ignorance and explains that the Tennoji group is a huge conglomerate that first made its name in mining. Among those companies under its umbrella are Japan's largest producers of non-ferrous metals and chemicals, and its scale is on par with the Konohana group. Itsuki's reaction lets her know that he's familiar with the Konohana group, but that only angers her further, making her think that Hinako's presence here is what relegates her name to obscurity. Mirai quickly regains her composure and changes the subject, asking him if there was something troubling him. Itsuki nervously explains that someone left a wallet in the women's bathroom, so he wanted to retrieve it. Without a doubt, Mirai decides to help him and retrieves the wallet from the bathroom herself, saving him a lot of trouble. However, after she does, she also asks him how a man realized there was a wallet in the women's bathroom. Itsuki thinks quickly and tells her that its owner asked him to find it, and this was the only place he couldn't check. Mirai doesn't seem to like Hinako, so he decides to leave her name out of it to avoid problems. After hearing his explanation, Mirai tells him that it sounds like someone has reduced him to their errand boy, which is utterly inappropriate. She reminds him that his attendance at this school means he's a future leader, so if he allows another to press him into service, his company will never thrive. Itsuki accepts her advice and tells her that he'll be more careful, but Mirai notices his lack of confidence, so she asks him to speak more clearly. When he speaks more firmly, Mirai confirms that he has potential, so she also advises him to fix his posture as well, because confidence comes from posture. Itsuki follows her instructions right away, so Mirai leaves satisfied and lets him know that if there's anything he needs in the future, he just has to seek out her golden locks. This interaction was about to end well, but Itsuki decides to ask her if this school doesn't forbid dyeing her hair. Mirai freezes immediately, asking him if he's claiming her hair is as false as a gold-plated ring. Itsuki tells her that he didn't mean to imply that, but Mirai just runs away in shame and exclaims that she doesn't dye her hair. He just lets her go, even though it's obvious to him that she does dye her hair. Itsuki manages to make it through the day, and after the last class, Karen and Kazuya approach him to ask him if he wants to have a welcome party. He politely rejects the invitation, letting them know that he was asked to come home early today, but he also tells them that he'd love to accept their offer another time, since he has some questions about the school as well. Itsuki later goes outside and finds Hinako feeding the fish in a pond on the school grounds, saying that she doesn't want to go. That confuses him a little, since this morning all she wanted was to go home. Hinako just tells him that she wants to stay here, because there's too much to learn and stuff back at the mansion, which means she can't relax. Itsuki tells her that she still can't stay here forever, but even though he tries his hardest to make her move, Hinako doesn't budge. That's when he remembers that Shizune gave him something to help in this situation, but when he checks what it is, all he sees is a bag of potato chips. Hinako immediately jumps at him, trying to reach for the bag of potato chips, but Itsuki tells her that she can only have it if she goes home. Unable to resist, Hinako ends up giving in and goes back home, and Itsuki then learns that she usually isn't allowed intemperate foods like potato chips. The drive to school was exhausting enough, but it got even worse when they came back. Shizune's lessons began with studying for the next day, then went into etiquette and self-defense. After the self-defense lesson, even though he easily gives up, Shizune admits that he seems to learn quickly. He decides to ask her a question after that, since Hinako told him that her longest caretaker lasted a month, and he wants to know why. Shizune explains that Kagen is the one who found all her previous caretakers, and they were all very strict with Hinako, so they were unable to form a relationship of trust. It's been a significant source of distress for Kagen, and this is his first time hiring an ordinary person unconnected to the Konohana family, so this is a gamble for them as well. Itsuki understands everything a little better after that conversation, and he can't believe this is just the first day for him, so he wonders if he can really pull this off. He runs into Hinako after the self-defense lesson, and she doesn't hesitate to tell him that he stinks. Itsuki clarifies that he's heading to the bath now, so Hinako decides to take him to her room, showing him her personal bath. Itsuki is honestly only surprised by how fancy everything looks, but he completely forgets about that when Hinako takes her clothes off and asks him to join her. Without understanding a thing, he simply ends up in the bath with Hinako in their swimsuits. Itsuki tries his hardest to calm down, trying to find something to distract himself. He finally comes up with an idea and decides to read the profiles on their classmates that Shizune arranged. People talk a lot about their family businesses at school, so she wants him to memorize them. Itsuki asks her if she has any real friends in class, but to his surprise, Hinako quickly denies it. She tells him that even though she's usually surrounded by students, none of them are her friends. Itsuki admits that they certainly give off more of a hanger-on vibe, so he's not really surprised. He then asks her if she ever wishes she had friends, but she simply tells him that he's all she needs. Itsuki gets a little flustered by that, but he thanks her anyway, and that's when Hinako decides to sit closer to him, asking him to wash her hair, since Shizune always does it. Having no other choice, Itsuki simply assumes that this is part of the job, so he washes her hair and asks her why she chose him as caretaker. Hinako only smiles and tells him that she likes how he just accepts stuff she does and looks after her. Itsuki doesn't say anything to that, because it's not really an answer, but he at least thinks it's nice to know she really trusts him. Hinako suddenly stands and complains about the heat, saying that her swimsuit is in the way. Itsuki immediately panics, but she explains that she only wore a swimsuit in the bath because Shizune insisted. As soon as he finds out Shizune knows they're there, Itsuki notices her murderous glare watching them from behind the door. He turns pale at that very moment, and once Hinako leaves, Shizune decides to have a talk with him, letting him know that she's been watching since the beginning. She informs him that she's prepared a change of clothes and also a medicine to cause ED. Shizune instructs him that in the future, in a situation where he might lust after Hinako, he must take one of these in advance. Itsuki just starts trembling with fear, letting out a horrified scream and having no idea that what Shizune gave him are actually just vitamins. The next day at school, he manages to steel himself for the day ahead, but after retrieving something he forgot, he accidentally bumps into another student. The moment the girl sees him, she immediately recognizes him, and even though he tries to play dumb, she easily confirms that he's Itsuki, so she instantly jumps at him in tears, saying that she's missed him so much. Karen had already talked to him about this girl before, and she told him that she's Narika Miyakojima from Class B. She's an amazing athlete, and they call her the school's cool beauty, but what she's probably best known for is something else. After all, she's honestly really standoffish, and there's all kinds of rumors going around about her, like that she's from a Yakuza family. Itsuki also recalls Kagen mentioning her before, since he looked into his family history. He had informed him that the Miyakojima family heiress is enrolled at Gakuin, and even though he didn't believe he had any personal friction with their household, he asked him to avoid unnecessary interactions. Unfortunately, Itsuki completely failed at that, and now Narika is all over him crying uncontrollably. Here is where we delve into their past, since a long time ago, Itsuki actually spent time at the Miyakojima family estate. As fellow worthless layabouts, his parents always got along well, but there was one time when they came to the brink of divorce. Itsuki was 10 at the time, and his mother took him out of their place to stay with the family of his late grandmother, which was the Miyakojima family. Many members of the family were against this, since they thought they could be a bad influence on Narika. Itsuki would later learn that his grandmother was disowned by her parents, but his mother forced her way back in. While they were staying at the estate, Itsuki met Narika for the first time, and she was pretty aggressive at the time as well. As soon as she questions who he is, Itsuki introduces himself, saying that they arrived here yesterday. To his surprise, the first thing Narika tells him is that she hates weaklings. She explains that the servants told her about him already, so she knows that they're staying here expecting a free ride. Itsuki can't really deny it, but surprisingly, Narika tells him that she'll give him a job, so he doesn't have to worry, because he's going to look after her. Narika was the only daughter of the Miyakojima family, and from that day forward, Itsuki spent most of his time by her side, helping her with the simplest things, like getting rid of bugs or comforting her whenever she cries. With time, Narika easily grows attached to him, and she even tells him that he's stronger than her. After all, he doesn't cry when he sees bugs, and he's fine when adults yell at him, unlike her. Narika confesses that she wants to be a strong member of the Miyakojima family, but she's actually a coward, and even though she's already 10, she can't even go out by herself. She's been taught all her life that the world outside is dangerous, so she is scared of leaving. Despite that, Narika mentions that she recently caught sight of a girl around her age walking by herself, so she thinks if she only had more courage, she'd be able to do the same. After hearing this, Itsuki asks her if she'd like to go out with him to see what it's like. This offer clearly takes her by surprise, but Narika takes his hand without hesitation, eager to see what the world outside is like with her own eyes. Given that she's spent her whole life at home, when Narika finally goes outside with Itsuki, she's amazed by the simplest things, feeling free for the very first time. Itsuki is just happy to see her enjoying herself so much, so he shows her more things he knows she'll like, even letting her try some sweets at a candy shop. From that day on, the two of them would slip off the estate for short stints, and they'd really enjoy their time together. However, their little game was soon discovered, and Narika's father harshly confronted Itsuki, accusing him of putting his daughter in danger. Not letting him defend himself, he kicked both Itsuki and his mother back out on the street. The day he left, Narika promised him in tears that she would become strong, and that was the last day he saw her, until now. Now that they've reunited at the academy, Narika doesn't want to let him go again, and she still can't stop crying. Itsuki tries to make her calm down, but when she finally stops crying, she confesses that she got so excited that she lost all feeling in her legs, so she can't move anymore. Having no other choice, Itsuki takes her to the infirmary, where they tell her that she'll feel better with rest. Before he he can leave, Narika stops him, asking him not to leave her alone with tears in her eyes. Itsuki decides to stay a little longer and apologizes for what happened when they were kids, saying that he shouldn't have taken her out without permission. She quickly tells him that there is nothing to be sorry for, because she's actually really grateful he did that. After all, if he hadn't taken her out back then, she would probably still be a coward. Itsuki asks her if she's not a coward now, but Narika nervously confesses that she's still got plenty to work on, since she still can't make friends. Itsuki admits that it does seem like people have the wrong idea about her, so he asks her how that happened. Narika explains that the Miyakojima family promotes a warrior mindset, so she's spent her whole life learning all kinds of martial arts. However, because of the family tradition, people think they're a bunch of warmongers. Narika admits that this is embarrassing for her, but she feels okay telling him anyway, so she confesses that she gets so nervous around people. Her face freezes up and she scares them all the time. The next thing she knew, people were calling her delinquent and yakuza, and she doesn't know what to do to fix that now. That's why she desperately asks Itsuki for help, but before he can give her an answer, his phone rings and he has to step out to answer the call. As soon as he picks up, Shizune asks him where he is now, so he explains that a student was ill, so he took her to the nurse's office. Shizune admits that she was wondering why his location didn't match Hinako's, and she asks him to return to the classroom at once. After all, even though it's fine to help others, he must not forget his caretaker duties. Itsuki accepts this and decides to head back, but Narika asks him what he's doing at this school. He just tells her that it's a pretty long story and apologizes, saying that he has to leave now. As he's about to walk out, Narika quickly stops him to ask him if he's not going to disappear again. That question takes him by surprise, making him remember the day he left her, so he decides to reassure her with a smile, promising that she'll see him again. Once Narika is completely sure about this, she shyly asks him to pat her head in that case, since he did it all the time back then. Itsuki hesitates at first, but he decides to comply to make her feel better, and Narika admits that it really is reassuring. He once again apologizes for disappearing back then, but she tells him that it's fine because they found each other again. Just then, Hinako suddenly walks in with a perfect smile, kindly asking them what they're doing. That scares them more than it should have, but Hinako keeps her kind and perfect demeanor, explaining that she felt a bit under the weather, so she removed herself from class. She asks again what the two of them are doing here, so Itsuki nervously explains that he found Narika collapsed in the hall, so he brought her here. Hinako asks him if she suffered some sort of cranial injury, by chance, since it appeared he was patting her head. Itsuki confirms just then that she saw that as he feared, but Narika nervously tries to explain that she and Itsuki actually go way back. That only seems to make things worse, but Narika continues and informs her that Itsuki lived at her house when they were 10 years old, and he was her caretaker. She explains that she owes him a lot for all of that, so she was just happy to meet him again. Hinako keeps a carefully neutral expression as she listens to every word, but Narika doesn't notice her reaction and asks Itsuki if he could come by her house sometime. She tells him that they could just hang out if he likes, but if he wants, they could resume their old relationship too. Itsuki is surprised by the offer, but just as he's about to explain the situation, Hinako interrupts him and kindly tells Narika that what she asks is impossible. She informs her just then that Itsuki is currently in her family's employ, something Narika wasn't expecting. Itsuki is a little surprised as well because they're supposed to keep it a secret, so he doesn't understand why she's doing this. Seeing Narika's confusion, he has no choice but to explain what his job is about, saying that it's mostly about looking after Hinako. Narika doesn't like that information at all, so she points at Hinako and exclaims that this isn't fair because she had Itsuki first. Hinako keeps a neutral expression and calmly tells her that she can't speak to the past, but her family is Itsuki's current employer, something she can't change. Once that's clear, she tells Itsuki that Narika's health appears to be restored, so it would be best for them to return to their classroom. As if nothing happened, Hinako mentions that she's recovered as well and decides to leave with Itsuki, who feels a little sorry for Narika. Now that they're alone, he asks Hinako if it's safe to say that she's not really sick and that she actually came looking for him. Hinako confirms it and explains that she got scared she'd get lost on her own, so she played sick and had someone take her halfway. Itsuki apologizes for worrying her after hearing that, but he asks her why she told Narita all of that, since their relationship was supposed to stay secret. Hinako simply explains that she had to get it through her skull, but Itsuki starts wondering if she was jealous or something. However, when he remembers all their interactions until now, he completely discards the idea. Hinako suddenly stops walking and decides to ask him whose caretaker he is, so he tells her with no hesitation that he's her caretaker at the moment. That makes her feel pretty satisfied, so she smiles and asks him to go get yelled at by Shizune together. Itsuki is a little terrified by that, but when they meet with Shizune in the car, she clarifies that it sounds like Hinako was equally culpable, and although they knew that he and Narika were related, they failed to realize they had met before, which was a failure of research on their part. Shizune informs him that she will think up an explanation he can give to Narita, so she hopes she can count on him to talk to her and ask her to remain silent. Itsuki doesn't have any problem with this, so Shizune decides to point out that Hinako has been clinging to him in the manner of a koala for some time now, so she wants to know what inspired this. Itsuki actually wishes he knew as well, though he knows there's no way Hinako is going to explain it herself. Instead, she simply asks him to pat her head, and even though it takes him a little by surprise at first, he decides to oblige. The next day at school, Karen and Kazuya approach Itsuki to ask him if he'd like to celebrate celebrate his welcome party after class today. Knowing that he should be free today, he accepts the invitation, so they tell him that he can bring anyone he wants to invite. To his surprise, Hinako immediately tells him that she'll go, and she even calls Shizune to get permission from her, saying that she wants to go to a tea party with Itsuki. Shizune easily gives her permission, knowing that it should be acceptable if Itsuki is also there. However, she asks her if she's really certain about this, considering it's almost about time. She doesn't elaborate further, but Hinako assures her that she's going to be fine. Itsuki reminds her that it's just an ordinary hangout, so she really doesn't have to go with him. Before he can finish his sentence, Hinako grabs him by his clothes and clarifies that if he's going, then she's going too. That surprises him a little, but Itsuki assumes that she just wants to make friends, so he doesn't question her any further. He then decides to meet with Narita, who is still mad about what happened, and she even calls him a traitor because she wanted to live with him again. She immediately regrets her own words and asks him to forget about it, but Itsuki tries to make her calm down and explains that he's been adopted by the household. To put it simply, his father runs a Konohana Group affiliate company, and the Konohana family decided to take him in as a kind of live-in apprentice. Narita assumes that means he lives in their house and learns about high society, which Itsuki confirms and explains that he was hoping they could keep that a secret. Fortunately, she easily agrees, understanding that those sorts of arrangements are pretty tenuous after all. Itsuki thanks her for her understanding, and once that's out of the way, he decides to invite her to the tea party after class. The invitation surprisingly moves her to tears, so she confesses that she's actually always wanted to have a tea party, and no one's ever invited her to one before. Narita asks him if it's alright though, since her presence could spoil the mood for everyone. Itsuki is a little unsure at first, but he does his best to reassure her and tells her it'll be fine. After talking to her, he hurries back to his classroom and suddenly runs into Mirai, who tells him that she heard he's an acquaintance of Hinako Konohana, so she knows he's part of the Konohana faction. Itsuki doesn't quite understand what she means by that, but since she's kind of defensive, he asks her if she doesn't like Hinako. Surprisingly, Mirai nervously clarifies that nothing could be further from the truth, because she fully acknowledges the competency of Hinako Konohana, and both her beauty and academic accomplishments are on par with her own. Itsuki just thinks that's a roundabout way to brag about herself, though he doesn't mention it, of course. Mirai then exclaims that the attention Hinako garners for them is simply excessive, and she wonders if it's because of her sociable nature, since it's as if she never stops smiling. Itsuki just notices that she seems crazy fixated on Hinako, so he decides to invite her to the tea party as well. After class, both Karen and Kazuya are shocked to see Mirai, Hinako, and Narika at the same table, so they ask Itsuki where they met and how he got to know all these amazing girls in just 3 days. Itsuki doesn't know how to explain it, so he simply tells them that it all just sort of happened. Mirai takes the initiative and decides to begin with the formal introductions, saying that she's the daughter of the Tennoji group. Kazuya introduces himself as well, mentioning that his family runs a shipping company, and Karen mentions that her family runs a retailer, but mainly electronics shops. Hinako also formally introduces herself, and when it's Narita's turn, she fumbles her own introduction due to her nerves. Itsuki follows right after and tells them that his family runs an IT company, concluding with the introductions. Mirai clarifies that there is no need to be intimidated by her family's station, so they can speak to her with the same candor they would anyone. Itsuki takes the opportunity to tell Narika that she doesn't have to be nervous either, so she tries to calm down. However, Karen and Kazuya are a little surprised that he called her by her first name, so Narika quickly explains that she met him when they were 10, which is why he invited her to the tea party. Her nervous smile kind of terrifies them, so Itsuki intervenes and lets them know that they have the wrong idea about her. He assures them there's no need to be afraid of Narika, and explains that she spent most of her time in the family home as a child, so she struggles a bit with conversation. Itsuki informs them that the rumors about her are entirely false, and Narika is glad that he finally cleared that up. Mirai mentions that the Miyakojima family business is sporting goods, and it wouldn't take much investigation to realize that the rumors aren't true. Knowing this helps everyone relax a little, so Karen asks Narika more about her, wanting to know how she usually spends her time. Narika tells her that she does a lot of training since they have a dojo at her house, and she spends most of her time working out. Kazuya then asks Hinako if she spends most of her time studying, but she denies it and explains that, as important as studying is, she's always sure to take breaks, indulging in desserts and the like. When Karen asks her what her favorite snack is, Hinako smiles and tells her it's probably scones, even though Itsuki knows very well her favorite snack is actually potato chips. He takes a sip of his tea to avoid saying anything, but Mirai quickly scolds him and explains that when one partakes in black tea, proper etiquette suggests that he raises the cup to his mouth. Itsuki easily understands what she means and fixes his posture right away, thanking her for the correction. He explains that he went to a normal school, so he still has a lot to learn about etiquette. Kazuya tells him that normal schools have some interesting cultural practices, like borrowing stuff they don't give back, splitting the cost of a meal, sneaking lunch in class, and other things. Itsuki clarifies that's not exactly culture, and decides to mention one of the fun customs he knows, the 3-second rule. As a demonstration, he grabs a cookie and lets it fall on the table, just to pick it back up and eat it. He then explains that the rule says that it's still good to eat if they pick it up within 3 seconds, though he knows it's not the smartest thing to do. Kazuya is actually impressed by that custom, and surprisingly, Hinako decides to try it out, doing the same same he did. Mireille admits it's amusing, but she also thinks it's quite vulgar, and Itsuki simply agrees. He was a little worried, but he's glad everyone is actually having fun. After the tea party, Mireille tells Hinako that this was her first tea party with her in a private capacity, but to her surprise, it was not displeasing. Hinako kindly agrees and asks her to have another tea party sometime, taking her by surprise. Mireille then tells Itsuki that he's certainly fixed his posture, and it makes him far more appealing. Once she leaves, Narika mentions that her family is caught up in traffic, so she's going to meet them there since they're close. Itsuki decides to walk her that far at least, and once they're on their own, Narika can finally relax, and tells him that she really appreciates how much he helped her at the tea party. After all, without him, she would have been alone until she graduated for sure. Itsuki clarifies that he only gave her a push, but Narika insists, saying that she thinks this is the day that will change the rest of her life, so he really is her hero. Despite how happy that makes her, she also gets really frustrated and exclaims that Hinako is not being fair for taking him from her. She finally found him again, so she doesn't understand why he has to be staying at her house. Narika asks him how long his apprenticeship will last, but Itsuki isn't sure, so she just asks him if he'll come to her house once it's over. Itsuki doesn't give her a clear answer, saying that maybe he'll do it if he can, so Narika complains and clarifies she knows that he's just being polite. The next day, after another lesson in table manners, Shizune tells Itsuki that it appears he's mastered the basics. Itsuki appreciates the acknowledgement and tells her that he owes it all to her. Shizune reminds him that he won't accompany Hinako at meals without proper table manners, so it's important he learns everything about it. When she mentions this, he decides to ask her where Hinako usually dines, and Shizune informs him that she takes her meals in the dining room by herself. She then tells him that she intends to gradually begin ramping up his duties, because the final role of a caretaker is to see to Hinako's needs from when she first awakens to when she goes to sleep at night. Itsuki understands this so far, but Shizune then decides to tell him one other thing regarding Hinako. After receiving this information, Itsuki goes to the bath with Hinako to help her wash her hair, as usual. He keeps his composure and politely asks her if there's anything not to her liking, though she seems pretty satisfied. Once her hair is clean, the next step is to take a shower, and Itsuki admits that Shizune made such an elaborate setup. She created a stall so that Hinako can shower without her bathing suits, and of course, only she is allowed inside. Itsuki is intimidated just by the memory of the way she said that, but he quickly recovers and asks Hinako to grab the basin near the water. Hinako grabs the basin, but as she walks towards him, she accidentally drops it, so she uses the 3-second rule to pick it back up. Itsuki admits that seeing how happy that makes her makes him glad that he shared it, but he clarifies that she probably shouldn't do it in front of people. Hinako still thinks it's fun, and she mentions that he was alone with Narika after the tea party, so she wants to know what they talked about. Itsuki quickly looks away and tells her that they just talked about how the tea party was fun and nothing else. His answer doesn't sound as convincing, so Hinako suddenly leans on him, reminding him that he's her caretaker and asking him not to go away. That takes him by surprise, but Itsuki panics even more when she suddenly faints. Hinako is taken to her room soon afterwards, and Shizune later informs him that she appears to have a mild fever. Itsuki is more calm now, and he admits that if she hadn't warned him in advance, he would have been even more freaked out. After all, what Shizune told him earlier was that Hinako would likely have a fainting spell soon. Still, he asks her how she knew about that, and Shizune informs him that it's a regular occurrence. She explains that the strain of Hinako's daily performance takes a toll on her, and the necessity of playing a role so drastically different from her true self inevitably puts her under stress. That makes Itsuki feel clearly concerned, so he asks her how she can be so calm about that. Shizune tells him that the fever will lessen in 2 or 3 days, so it is not particularly worrisome. Still, Itsuki clarifies that if the stress makes her collapse, then she should probably drop the performance. Shizune suddenly cuts him off with a harsh expression, asking him to respect his place. She then explains that it is the will of the Konohana family that she maintains her facade, and Hinako understands and accepts that. Once that's clear, she asks him to retire to his room because he needs sufficient rest for his classes tomorrow. Itsuki is surprised that she wants him going to school even though Hinako has collapsed, so Shizune assures him that she will see to her care. She then reminds him that his grades are not at a level sufficient for him to afford to skip class. Knowing this, Itsuki has no choice but to go to school the next day, though Kazuya easily notices that he looks kind of blue. Itsuki quickly collects himself and tells him that he's feeling just fine, so Karen approaches him and says that they should invite his friends and have another tea party. Kazuya tells her that she can't always expect a group like that to have time for them though, so she decides to forget about it for now. Karen then notices that Hinako isn't here today, and Kazuya assumes it's probably that usual thing. When Itsuki asks him what he means, Kazuya explains that Hinako sometimes takes off to help with the family business, so if she isn't here today, it means she must be really busy. Itsuki doesn't say anything, but he quickly understands that's the cover story every time she collapses. That only makes him worry even more, because that means nobody's worried about her. He continues thinking about this during the rest of the day at school, wondering who helps Hinako when she's suffering, and if she has someone to lean on. When he finally returns home, the first thing he does is ask how Hinako is doing, but Shizune tells him that she's still resting. She mentions that fortunately, it's the weekend, so she'll have 2 days to rest before returning to school on Monday. Itsuki is relieved to hear that, but he asks her if Kagen isn't coming even at a time like this. Shizune informs him that he's working in the main residence because he has responsibilities as the head of the Konohana group. Itsuki decides to ask about Hinako's mother in that case, but Shizune tells him that she has sadly passed on. That takes him by surprise, and it makes him realize that there is so much he doesn't know. He knows that's natural though, since he only just became her caretaker. Even so, he asks Shizune if they could get through their lessons quickly today, saying that he'll put in all his effort to keep up. Shizune is surprised by his sudden determination, but she easily accepts, letting him know that they'll accelerate the usual pace by 50%. Itsuki promises that he'll keep up with that, and during all the lessons, he starts wondering if he could become that person, the person Hinako can lean on. After the lessons, Itsuki doesn't waste any time and decides to visit Hinako in her room to check on her and be there for her. Hinako looks actually happy to see him, so she thanks him and tells him that she's glad he's here. Itsuki smiles and reminds her that he's her caretaker, so she can let him know if there's anything she wants him to do. Without hesitation, Hinako asks him to hold her hand, so Itsuki easily complies and realizes just how small her hand is. He holds onto it until she falls asleep, trying to make her feel comforted and assuring her she'll be okay. At some point, Hinako takes him by surprise when she calls for her father in her sleep, and Itsuki realizes just then that what she wants from her caretaker is a feeling of family. He sure has known that feeling since he was a child, because family is something everyone wants. Shizune approaches him just then and asks him to step outside briefly, saying that she has something important to discuss with him. Itsuki tries to stand up, but Hinako's hand holds tighter onto his, so Shizune realizes she doesn't have a choice and says that she'll tell him here. She asks him if Kagen already told him why Hinako maintains her facade, and Itsuki confirms it, saying that it's to ensure she marries into the best possible family. Shizune informs him that's merely the secondary goal, and clarifies that there is a greater reason for it, to bring a son-in-law into the Konohana family. She explains that Kagen has a son, Hinako's older brother, Takuma Konohana, but he's much older than her and lives in a different estate, so he rarely sees her. Normally Takuma would have been the family's heir, but Kagen is unconvinced he'd be a worthy leader of the Konohana group. He wants a son-in-law to take that role, and when that happens, Hinako will share in his leadership duties. She must not only have management skills but social skills as well, because public disdain for her could cause friction within the group, which, if worse came to worst, could lead to many people being harmed. Itsuki only then begins to understand what it means to be the heiress to a conglomerate, so the situation is clearer now, and he can see the burden Hinako bears. It's not easy to get close to someone like that, but he asks Shizune if there is no way he can help. Shizune clarifies that's not it, and explains that she did tell him to respect his place before, but only because she wishes for him to support Hinako while maintaining proper respect for their positions. After all, that's the role of a caretaker. Without another word, she walks out of the room, and Itsuki wonders if helping Hinako while she takes her breaks is the most he can do, to comfort her when she collapses from exhaustion, and to be warm with her, like real family would. Itsuki decides just then that he's going to do his best for her. Shizune turned out to be right, and Hinako returned to school that Monday, completely recovered. During lunch, Itsuki feeds her, as usual, though this is one thing that feels like it goes beyond family. Hinako tries to feed him the things she doesn't like, but Itsuki firmly tells her that she has to eat her veggies and not be picky. That makes her sulk, but he reminds her that an unbalanced diet can lead to her getting sick. Hinako tells him that she'll just sleep if she gets sick, so that's probably better anyway. Despite this, Itsuki tells her that he likes it better when she's healthy, and surprisingly, that convinces her to eat her veggies, even though she hates it. Sometime later, Shizune gives him another job to do, helping Hinako wake up in the morning. The next day, he visits her room to wake her up, but he soon realizes it's not an easy task, since she really doesn't want to get up. She even asks him to help her up, not moving an inch, but Itsuki doesn't mind and simply helps her. Once she's up, he tells her that he'll be waiting outside the door while she changes, but to his surprise, Hinako also asks him to help her with that. Itsuki panics at first, but he quickly tries to calm down and focuses on his job, convincing himself that what Hinako wants is family and someone she can trust. With that in mind, he begins to unbutton her shirt, but he freezes when Shizune knocks on the door and tells him that Hinako spends most of her wake-up time half asleep. She warns him that she may say absurd things, like asking him to help her change, but he must not take it seriously. Itsuki's face immediately goes pale when he realizes he did take it seriously, but he quickly tells her that he won't, of course. Shizune then tells him that she knew he wouldn't, because she's seen how hard he's worked over the last few days, and she trusts him as much as Hinako does. That blind trust hurts him a little, but even then, Hinako teases him and tells him that she looks forward to spending wake-up time with him. When they get to school, he's surprised to find out it's midterms already, so Kazuya explains that they do them a bit earlier than most schools. He hands him the questions from previous tests, and Itsuki soon realizes this might be really rough. Hinako asks him what's wrong during lunch, and he tells her that the midterms look like they'll be harder than he expected. That's actually concerning to Hinako, because he'll be fired as a caretaker if his grades get too bad. With that in mind, she asks him if he wants her to teach him, and smugly mentions that she's smarter than she looks, and she even has the best grades in their year. Itsuki humbly accepts her help, and Karen later approaches him, saying that she heard he's nervous about midterms. He doesn't deny it, and decides to ask her if she and Kazuya have any special arrangements when studying for tests. Karen tells him that she just spends a little more time studying, and Kazuya mentions that he he uses some of his usual preparation time for review. When they ask him how he used to study at his old school, Itsuki admits that he sometimes pulled all-nighters, and they'd have study groups too. He notices their confusion at that, so he explains that in study groups, everyone gets together to study, because it can be motivating to have other people around. Karen really likes the idea, so she says that they should have a study group since it sounds fun. Kazuya agrees and says that they could invite the tea party group for that, which sounds like a better idea to her. Itsuki is a little surprised by how sudden everything is, but they end up having a study group that very same day with everyone who attended the tea party. While they study, Kazuya mentions that he just realized having the year's 2 top students will be a big shot in the arm. Itsuki already knows that Hinako is number 1, so he asks him who's number 2. With a pained expression, Mirai informs him that she's number 2, so Itsuki quickly apologizes for rubbing salt into the wound. Kazuya then says that Karen gets pretty good grades as well, but she clarifies that they're nowhere close to the top, so she's sure Narika's are better than hers. Narika tells her that her only good courses are gym and history, because the Miyakojima family maintains a warrior mindset, and they start studying history when they're very young. She sadly admits that she's mostly failing in her other studies, so Karen feels a little bad for asking. Mirai then asks Itsuki if he has any ideas about how the study group should proceed. When he denies it, she suggests that they split into tutors and tutees, since that would be most efficient, and Hinako, Karen, and herself can serve as tutors. Hinako gladly agrees and says that she likes the idea, because teaching others is educational for the tutors as well. Mirai asks Itsuki what his weakest subject is, and he admits he has the hardest time with math. Hinako tries to offer herself to help him, but Mirai interrupts her and tells him that she will serve as his tutor, because math is her strongest subject. Karen tells Narika that she'll tutor her in that case, and Kazuya quickly jumps to conclusions, hoping that Hinako tutors him since there's no one else left. Hinako accepts with a perfect smile, but at the same time, she harshly stomps on Itsuki's foot. Itsuki does his best to hide his pain, but he knows Hinako's been in a bad mood, because she thought they'd get to study together before all this. Unable to do anything about it, they just begin with the study group, and surprisingly, with Mirai's assistance, Itsuki's really flying through these problems. Narika, on the other hand, is really having a hard time, so she asks for a break and says that her head's about to explode. During the break, Itsuki decides to walk out to get some fresh air, but Mirai approaches him to have a word. Without beating around the bush, she asks him if he really is the heir to a medium-sized business. Itsuki realizes that she saw right through him, which shocks him a little, but he tries to keep his composure and asks her what makes her think that. Mirai explains that it's his table manners, because even though his execution was fine, they seem superficially acquired to her eye, and it's as if he had taken on a great deal of information in a very short time. She admits that she wondered why he would be working so hard and thought there might be an answer in his history. Mirai clarifies that if he doesn't wish to share, then she won't pry further. Itsuki asks her if she still trusts him, and she tells him that this school doesn't admit those of dubious repute, so she's sure he was given a full background check, and she's merely asking out of personal curiosity. After thinking about a certain possibility, Mirai seems to realize something, but she decides not to mention it and tells him that it's nothing. When they rejoin the others, Karen informs them that they were talking about a party that Hinako's family is holding. Mirai already knows about this, so she assumes it's the social gathering held every year in the spring. Karen asks her if she's ever attended, but Mirai denies it and explains that her father has participated several times. However, as the relationship between the Tennoji and Konohana families is delicate, she has refrained from attending herself. Karen admits that it must be nice to get invited since she loves wearing dresses and she goes to a lot of parties, but she bets the Konohana family one is extra luxurious. Hinako kindly asks her if she'd like her to send her an invitation, and Karen of course loves the idea, so Hinako even tells Kazuya that she'll send him one as well. Itsuki discreetly asks her if that's really okay, so Hinako explains that she's been told she can invite people when she wants, but she never has. Mirai then tells her that she'll attend the upcoming event this time, because they know each other properly now, and she can accept her invitation not as the daughter of the Tennoji family, but as a friend. Hinako gladly accepts, and since Itsuki will be going as well, they manage to convince Narika to go, even though she doesn't like crowds. Midterms arrive in no time, and this school has courses that normal schools don't, like economics, so it is a tough undertaking for Itsuki, but he feels satisfied with his performance in the end. Even after tests are over, he decides to continue studying, and when Hinako questions him about it, he explains that he's really grateful for Mirai's tutoring and the test exams Shizune made up. Since Hinako is not sleepy, he decides to go out with her on a walk and lets her enjoy a popsicle in secret. He then asks her if she isn't too wiped out from the study group, and she admits that she's tired but assures him that she's fine. She clarifies that not being with him would have been worse, so she's not feeling too bad. Itsuki still reminds her that if it's easier to be alone, she doesn't have to force herself to come with him. Hinako explains that having him around made her realize one thing, and it's that easier isn't always better. Just then, part of her popsicle melts and falls on the ground, so she quickly tries to pick it up, using the 3-second rule. Itsuki immediately stops her, of course, so they both laugh about it in the end and go back into the house. After some time, Itsuki has to get ready for an important event, though he's having a hard time getting used to wearing such an elegant suit. Shizune informs him that the suit he's wearing comes from one of the finest Italian brands, and it costs 700,000 yen, so he must be careful with it. This information terrifies him a little, so he promises to be careful while wearing it. Hinako is going to attend one of Kagen's business luncheons, and he was asked to come along for his education, since Shizune wants him to experience high society atmosphere. She reminds him that today they will be dining with the president and member of the board of Chikamoto Shipwrights, and 2 members of the board of their business partner, Sea Japan United. When Hinako was 7 years old, they exchanged pleasantries with the president during a social event, so she must be on her best behavior. Hinako just thinks it's annoying though, so Shizune insists and asks her to do her best. When they arrive, Itsuki is a little shocked to see the small vacation house, which is not small at all. Shizune informs him that Hinako will enter through the front door and the luncheon will be held on the terrace, so they'll be waiting there. Before leaving, Hinako tells him that she has to go talk to strangers, though he asks her not to make it sound so criminal. Itsuki expects her to say another silly thing, but to his surprise, Hinaki tells him that she's going to do her best. He smiles at that and pats her head, saying that he won't be by her side, but he will still be watching over her, so once they get home, they can relax a little together. Hinako smiles and finally leaves, saying that she wants to eat more ice cream. As soon as she leaves, Itsuki realizes the mistake she just made when Shizune asks him what Hinako meant by that. Meanwhile, Hinako and her father welcome the president of the board to their house. The man gladly greets Kagen and tells him that it was his idea that they enjoy a meal in the fresh air of the countryside. He sees Hinako and admits that it's been a long time since he believes they've met before. Hinako affirms this and says that it was when she was 7 years old when her father brought her to a flower viewing party where they became acquainted. The president is really pleased that she actually remembered, and he admits that she's grown into a fine young lady. One of the members of the board mentions that a friend of his child attends Gakuin, and apparently she's seen as the perfect young lady. Hinako smiles and says that she's honored, and Kagen decides to invite them to join him at the table. Once they're outside, Shizune asks Itsuki how he'd interpret what he's seeing now that they're having lunch. Itsuki observes them carefully and mentions that their manners seem completely effortless. Shizune explains that's a sign of proper manners, because their behavior isn't labored in the slightest, yet carries a slight hint of grandeur to emphasize the courtesy being extended. By adhering to this unspoken contract, they build trust with each other. Etiquette is considered less important than it once was, but there are times when it is crucial, in particular for heads of organizations who must be cautious about speaking their minds. Manners allow them to build trust through behavior rather than words, and this is why breaking etiquette is considered a terrible faux pas. In just a few minutes during lunch, the president of the board can see that Hinako really lives up to her reputation since she's so poised and demure. He mentions that she surely has her choice of suitors, but Kagen clarifies that they haven't had the pleasure of an offer yet. This surprises the president a little, so he tells him that he has an acquaintance with just such an interest. Kagen smiles when he realizes he's closer to his goal, so he remains calm and asks him to elaborate. As the president tells him about it, Itsuki wonders what they're talking about, because Hinako suddenly seems kind of disengaged. The family the president is talking about deals in international trade and the jet set, so he considers a wife with proper etiquette a must. Kagen thinks it's not bad at all, so he tells him that he'll certainly look into it. The president laughs and says that it sounds like he shouldn't get his hopes up, but Kagen clarifies that it's the contrary and assures him he will give it his earnest consideration. One of the butlers brings them pastries for dessert, and the president is pleased to see that they served one of his favorites. He then asks Kagen if he should relay his interest in the match to the man in question, and of course, Kagen gladly accepts, assuring him his daughter's talents are beyond reproach. As soon as he says that, Hinako picks up a piece of her dessert that she accidentally dropped on the table and puts it in her mouth without thinking, saying that it's the 3-second rule. Everyone at the table freezes, and Hinako suddenly realizes what she just did, but nothing can erase her mistake now. The president looks at her with disappointment and mentions that perhaps he was misinformed after all. Shizune can't hear what they're saying, but she knows that this is not good, and she's not even sure what's going to happen. Knowing Kagen's personality, this is as close to a catastrophe as she can imagine. Once it's time for the president to finally leave, Kagen thanks him for joining him today. The president assures him that he enjoyed himself, since it's important to get away from the hustle and bustle sometimes. Despite this, before leaving, the president tells him that he'd appreciate it if they could put the discussion of marriage behind them, because his reputation is tied to his recommendations, after all. Kagen has no other choice than to accept this, so once the president leaves, he asks Shizune who taught Hinako that deplorable behavior. Shizune hesitates, but before she can speak, Itsuki decides to tell him the truth and apologizes, saying that it was him. Kagen then says that he has always wondered if a caretaker was truly necessary, but now he knows that he should never have allowed her to indulge herself at all. Allowing a behind-the-mask personality is what leads to situations like this, after all. With this in mind, Kagen orders Shizune to teach Hinako to maintain her facade in private. Shizune tells him that such a request would cause immediate collapse, but Kagen simply asks her to fix it, because this is what comes of indulging her collapses. It's not as if she's actually sick anyway, so he wants her to do what it takes to conquer her issue. After all, her birth into the Konohana family obligates her to protect her family name. Itsuki is terrified by the idea alone, because it means the unmasked Hinako will disappear. He tries to protest and apologizes again for ruining his dinner, saying that there must be a better way. However, Kagen clarifies that that this isn't his fault, since Hinako has been unable to keep a single caretaker for long. He assumed he would quit too, and anticipated that his influence on Hinako would be trivial. The fault does not lie with Itsuki, but himself for allowing that in the first place, and with Hinako for being so easily influenced. Without another word, Kagen orders Shizune to give Itsuki his payment when they return, because Hinako no longer needs a caretaker, and his employment with them is officially terminated. Before he can even process what's happening, Itsuki is kicked out of the mansion with nothing more than things in payment, realizing that he's once again unemployed. Kagen told him that he's included more than they agreed to in his payment, so if he has nowhere to stay, he can afford a roof over his head for a while. They also filed the paperwork to remove him from the school, so he can't go back there either. Itsuki stands before the mansion, still processing everything, and trying to accept the fact that the life he had in this place ended in just a moment. He tries to throw the money away out of frustration, but stops himself when he realizes that's all he has left. Having no other choice, he picks up his things and leaves, knowing that it all felt like a dream to begin with, though he wishes that's all it had been, because it'd mean Hinako wasn't suffering. Back at the mansion, Hinako asks for Itsuki, and Shizune informs her that he has already departed the mansion. Hinako mentions that Itsuki lasted a month as caretaker, which is a long time. Shizune listens to her while trying to hide her concern, and Hinako asks her if they can hire Itsuki as a servant if he can't be a caretaker, since she heard they don't have enough gardeners. She even suggests they hire him as a cook, or part of the cleaning staff, and mentions that there are lots of jobs that need doing here. However, Shizune decides to be clear with her, and informs her that Kagen doesn't want to keep Itsuki in his employ. Hinako can't hide how much that affects her, and tells her that she wants to see Itsuki. Shizune advises her against doing anything to further upset Kagen, so Hinako asks her whose side she's on. With no hesitation, Shizune reminds her that Kagen is her employer, but despite this, Hinako decides that she'll find Itsuki herself. Shizune simply tells her that she won't and returns to work, saying that for caution's sake, she will put someone at her door. Not caring about this, Hinako grabs the curtains of her room as soon as Shizune leaves, saying that she's a woman who gets things done. Meanwhile, Narika casually runs into Itsuki while she's out on a walk, and after seeing his sad expression, she decides to listen to him. After telling her everything, Itsuki mentions that they didn't even let him see her before he left, but the way things looked, she'll probably be even more restricted than before. Narika admits that the Konohana family seems really strict, considering they did all that over one mistake. Itsuki tells her that it's all his fault, because if he hadn't taught her that nonsense, this never would have happened. He blames himself for everything, and says that a commoner like him who knows nothing about etiquette never belonged with Hinako in the first place. Narika suddenly interrupts him and assures him that's not true at all. She reminds him that she's the person she is now because he came into her world and changed it, and she still remembers that day like it was yesterday. She wouldn't have experienced any of these things without him in her life, and she wouldn't have thought of earning her freedom from her father either. Narika tells him that she's more grateful to him than she can ever express in words, and she's sure Hinako feels the same way, because he taught her the joys of the outside world too. Itsuki then understands that they're things that seem silly and trivial to him, but maybe they're precious to Hinako and Narika. Now that he knows this, he thanks Narika and decides to leave, saying that he's going to negotiate directly with the Konohana family. As he runs, he remembers the promise he made, that he'd be with her and always support her. If her family, her classmates, and no one else can do it, then he'll be the one to do it, as her caretaker. Full of resolve, Itsuki acts without thinking and takes down the security at the entrance of the mansion, putting into practice everything he's learned about martial arts. He manages to climb the gates and infiltrates the mansion, using everything Shizune taught him to run past security or anyone who gets in his way. As he advances through the mansion, he realizes he's internalized everything they did, and he's really grateful to Shizune for that. Itsuki wants to get to the office on the top floor, but he suddenly stops running when he sees Hinako hanging from her bedroom window, holding onto some curtains she tied together herself. Without thinking, Itsuki jumps from the second floor and runs directly to her, catching her just in time after she falls. Still really agitated, he asks her what she was doing, and Hinako tells him that she just wanted to see him. Just then, some members of the security team exclaim that Hinako has been kidnapped again, so Itsuki starts running without thinking. By dusk, he finally manages to lose them, and Hinako tells him that she has a proposal, and explains that she'll be his hostage, so he has to convince her father. Itsuki clarifies that it sounds more like extortion, but Hinako doesn't care, and asks him to extort him in that case. Despite this, Itsuki knows something like that wouldn't solve the fundamental problem, so he just asks her to let him try to convince him, because he knows he can do it. When they walk back to the mansion, they run into Shizune, and realize that they're surrounded. Shizune tells Itsuki that he does seem to have natural talent in martial arts, and admits that he's come a long way in such a short time. She clarifies that she can't let them go, but Hinako insists and asks her to please let her stay with Itsuki, promising that she'll stick to the performance all the time and that she'll never drop the mask. That's what her father wants after all, for her to keep up a perfect facade all the time, everywhere. Shizune is surprised that she's willing to go that far, but Itsuki tells Hinako that she can't do that, because he doesn't want her to push herself so hard. That's why he wants to be with her, because he wants to be someone she can be herself around. Itsuki asks her not to voluntarily sacrifice the thing he wants to protect, and in response, Hinako places her hands on his face and accepts, accepts, saying that she trusts him. Shizune interrupts their moment and informs Itsuki that this will not end the way he expects. Just then, Kagen calls her, so she decides to leave and asks them to wait where they are. Itsuki asks her whose side she's on, and once again, Shizune simply says that Kagen is her employer, but this time, she does say with a smile that she's on Hinako's side. She then brings Kagen the replies to invitations to the Konohana family's social gathering. Since he'll be staying in this residence for a while, she had the main residence's mail delivered here at once. Kagen understands that much, but he asks her to explain about these 4 invitees she brought. Shizune takes the first one and says that it's Karen Asahi, the heiress to Jay's holdings. Kagen stops her before she can say more, and clarifies that the Asahi and Taisho families weren't invited, but they're valuable connections. The head of the Miyakojima family he only knows in passing, but not long ago, he gave him a courtesy call that he would attend if his daughter did. Kagen admits that what surprises him more is that the daughter of the Tennoji will attend. He's found their rivalry a difficult one to navigate, but this could be a valuable chance to establish trust with the Tennoji group. Kagen tells her that what he wants to know is why these 4 agreed to attend, so Shizune informs him that they are Hinako's friends at school. This surprises him even more, because Hinako has never invited anyone before, and suddenly she's making connections like these. Shizune decides to make a suggestion, and tells him that if he finds this change in Hinako's behavior a pleasing one, then to dismiss the one who inspired the change seems highly inadvisable. They're talking about a shipwright whom he had few dealings despite being partners, and 4 major companies that could be valuable connections moving forward. Kagen knows that it's clear which should take priority, so he asks Shizune to call Itsuki. Time after this, they finally hold the Konohana family's social gathering, where Itsuki finds Mirai, Karen, Kazuya, and Narika. They all look really elegant, dressed for the occasion, but Narika is actually panicking a little, so she asks Itsuki for help when she sees him, and says that the high society stuff is freaking her out. Mirai tells her that she shouldn't be intimidated, and invites her to go with her to mingle. Even though she's only trying to help, this terrifies Narika even more, but no one even tries to save her. Karen and Kazuya decide to go for a drink, but before they leave, Itsuki tells them that all of them look very nice in their dresses and suits. He later sees Kagen and decides to approach him, telling him that he greatly appreciates the accommodations he's made for them. Kagen talks to him outside and tells him that Hinako is a genius, and he's not only talking about her grades, her personality presents issues, but she possesses an inherent head for business, so despite it all, she is a worthy heir to the Konohana family. Kagen explains that he wants a son-in-law to inherit the business for appearances, but the one he really wants running things is Hinako. Even if it's hard on her now, he knows that her talent will blossom someday. After he leaves, Itsuki realizes he really can't understand how Kagen thinks, and he knows he can't do anything about the Konohana family's future either. But still, he wants to be Hinako's caretaker and maintain the promise he made that day. Hinako suddenly approaches him on the balcony, since her father told her he would be there. She thanks him for staying as her caretaker, and confesses that she was really happy about what he said back there, so she'll keep putting her trust in him. Itsuki realizes just then that he might forget his real role sometimes, but he doesn't give it any more thought and notices her tired expression. Hinako confesses that she's tired from so much mingling and asks him to pat her head. Itsuki complies without a second thought, but for some reason, Hinako suddenly turns red and pulls away, clearly flustered. When Itsuki tries to approach her to check on her, Hinako panics even more and turns around, assuring him it is nothing. This surprises him a little, because he's never seen her this nervous before, but not even Hinako understands what's going on, and all she knows is that she feels really weird. The next morning, Hinako is seemingly back to normal, and they return to their usual routine of Itsuki waking her up before school. Still half asleep, Hinako tells him that she doesn't want to go to school, as always. Itsuki is already used to that, so he just asks her to look up for a minute, saying that he'll wipe the drool off her face. Even though everything was going well, the moment Hinako looks up and fully wakes up, she returns to that weird state of panic around him. She immediately looks down and tells him that she'll wipe it off herself, so she asks him not to look at her right now. Itsuki doesn't understand what's going on, but he doesn't question her and lets her do it. He then tells her that she needs to get dressed now, but to his surprise, this time Hinako asks him to get out of the room. Shizune later asks him if something has happened between him and Hinako, since she has said she no longer wants him to provide her wake-up call. Itsuki wasn't expecting this at all, so he tells her what happened this morning and asks her if it's possible that he's done something to make her dislike him. Shizune doesn't think it's anything like that, so she just tells him that she'll keep an eye on things. Having no choice, Itsuki continues acting the same as usual around Hinako, but he knows that she's been acting a bit strangely since the night of the party. When they get to school, Karen informs him that they've put up the midterm test results, so everyone can see who got the best scores. Kazuya clarifies that it is only the top 50, so they definitely won't find his name on there. As expected, Hinako is number 1 again, so Karen congratulates her, as well as the other girls from her class. Soon enough, Hinako is surrounded by students again, and Itsuki confirms one more time just how impressive she is. At the same time, he can hear Mirai's frustration as she stands right next to him, which kind of takes him off guard. The moment she realizes he's looking at her, Mirai quickly composes herself and greets him. Itsuki congratulates her on placing second, but Mirai clarifies that she is unable to celebrate as long as that odious name appears above above hers. She still convinces herself that the result is not without its upside because she's narrowed the gap between them, so at last, victory is within her grasp. When she asks him where he placed, Itsuki tells her that he's not even on the board since he's probably in the middle or maybe a little below average. To his surprise, Mirai is very upset with that answer because she can't believe that he placed below average despite the instruction she provided him. Itsuki quickly tells her that her tutoring in math was extremely helpful, but Mirai interrupts him and warns him that he can't give up before he's even begun. After all, no matter how earnest he may be, he'll never improve without lofty goals. Her harsh scolding makes Itsuki shrink in place, but he immediately straightens up when Mirai scolds him about his posture as well. She soon calms down and then decides to make a proposal, asking him to spend time with her after class because she will continue to tutor him. Mirai explains that her first time teaching anyone was at the recent study group, and it made her realize that tutoring another improves her own understanding. Besides, she also improved her standing in relation to Hinako Konohana. Itsuki understands that much, but he asks her if she's sure that she wants him to be her student. Mirai confidently confirms it, saying that no one in her social circle has grades as low as his. She also bluntly says that she can tell that he feels an inferiority complex regarding his place at this school. That actually surprises Itsuki, because at first, it did feel like such a different world that inferiority complex didn't even begin to describe it. But lately, he feels like he's had all these little reminders about how much he's lacking. Mirai was able to easily see that, so he doesn't deny it and tells her that she's very perceptive when it comes to others. Mirai simply says that it's hardly a trait worth lauding, but she doesn't elaborate on that and tells him that once he's obtained appropriate confidence, he'll be able to more boldly engage with this world. Itsuki decides to think about it because he does admire Mirai's confidence in all situations, but he doesn't know if he could ever be like that. As if she were reading his thoughts, Mirai assures him that he can achieve it and then tells him that he wears his true feelings very plainly on his face and in his attitude. That said, she also mentions that as she'd consider this a favor he's doing for her, she should hope to aid him somehow in kind. Itsuki tells her that having her tutor him is more than enough, but Mirai thinks that's unacceptable, so she asks him if there's anything troubling him or that he's struggling with. Itsuki gives it some thought, and in the end, she ends up convincing him. So that night, he informs Shizune that Mirai is going to be teaching him etiquette. After hearing this, Shizune admits that Mirai is a very conscientious person, and Itsuki agrees. He then asks her if she thinks it is all right for him to do that after class for a while, since he'd really like to try it. After all, he thinks Mirai's teaching will make him a more suitable caretaker for Hinako. With that in mind, Shizune tells him that she has no objections, because Mirai may teach him etiquette better than she can. She then tells him that she also has a message for him from Kagan, and informs him that in addition to his duties with Hinako, he'd like him to continue to expand the Konohana family's network of connections. Itsuki is surprised that he'd ask him something like that, and he guesses that it means Kagan trusts him a little more, at least. Shizune clarifies that she'll speak to Hinako herself, so he lets her take care of that. But later that day, he notices that Hinako is in a bad mood after getting the message. To make her feel better, Itsuki secretly gives her ice cream while she takes a hot bath, hoping that she'll forgive him now. Hinako hesitates at first and asks him if he's doing this for her because she doesn't really like it, but if it's for her, then she might forgive him. Itsuki explains that it is partly for her, but also because he wants to become a better caretaker, so he's doing this for him as well. He clarifies that he'll be happy to turn Mirai down if she doesn't like it, but Hinako tells him that she doesn't want to get in his way. Itsuki admits that it's a bit of a relief to hear that, because it feels like she's been avoiding him lately. Hinako asks him what makes him say that, and Itsuki tells her that it's the fact that she apparently doesn't want him waking her up in the morning, and that sometimes it feels like she's pulling away from him. After hearing this, Hinako clarifies that she doesn't mean to pull away, but she also doesn't want to say what it is. Itsuki notices that she's flustered again for some reason, and he wonders why she's acting like this. He thought the month they'd spent together gave him insight into her thinking, but he's a little lost now. Not knowing what to say, he simply decides to do what he always does and offers to wash her hair with shampoo. Before doing this, he asks her why she picked that swimsuit today, since it's different from what she usually wears. Normally, she would use something that covers her less because she tends to get overheated. The question makes Hinako really nervous, so she gets defensive and asks him to just wash her hair already. Itsuki doesn't question her anymore, but as he washes her hair, he notices that some strands got stuck under her swimsuit. Without thinking, he moves the strap off her shoulder for a moment to release the hair that got caught, but Hinako immediately panics and jumps away from him, calling him an insensitive clod. Itsuki is kicked out of the bathroom, and he realizes that he's grown unable to anticipate Hinako's reactions. Soon enough, his after-school lessons with Mirai begin, so they both meet at a cafe, and Mirai tells him that first they have to set their goals. With no hesitation, she says that her goal is to defeat Hinako Konohana on the next major exam, which will take place in 1 month from now. Mirai tells him that she'd like to see him place within the top 50, but the fact that he only has 1 month to achieve that terrifies Itsuki. After taking a look at his notes, Mirai can tell that he's studying well every day, so she praises him for that. Itsuki thanks her, but he then decides to ask her why she's so competitive with Hinako. Mirai states in advance that there is no bad blood between Hinako Konohana and herself, and it it is merely that, as daughter of House Tennoji, she can't allow herself to be outstripped by anyone. Itsuki assumes that it is more like a family ethos in that case, but Mireille clarifies that it's actually a rule she has set for herself. This surprises him a little, but he asks her if she doesn't find it stifling to live that way. Mireille denies it and explains that as daughter of the Tennoji family, she must contribute to that family, so that is her mission, and where she finds her happiness. Without wasting more time, she decides that it's time for them to move to the etiquette lesson. Itsuki asks her if they could focus on table manners first, since he has a very personal reason for wanting that. Mireille accepts without a problem, so they hold the etiquette lesson over dinner at the cafe. That night after getting home, Itsuki continues studying, and Hinako hangs out in his room, as always, so she asks him if his lessons with Mireille were fun. Itsuki tells her that Mireille is uncompromising, both with herself and with others, so he found it very motivating. It's getting late already, so he decides to get her back to her room, but Hinako tells him that she wants to sleep here today. Itsuki reminds her that she can't, so she gives up and asks him to pat her head instead. He hesitates at first, and mentions that she didn't seem to like it when he did it at the party. Hinako clarifies that she did like it, but she doesn't elaborate further and looks away from him. Itsuki decides to pat her head, so Hinako tries to control her reaction, hiding how much it affects her. After just a few seconds, he ends up falling asleep, and Hinako realizes she's never seen his sleeping face before. It's clear that he's really tired, so she decides to take a look at his notes and sees that he was reading the Caretaker manual. Shizune later shows up to take her back to her room, so on their way back, Hinako confesses that she thinks something is wrong with her. She explains that she's glad Itsuki is her caretaker again, but sometimes she hates that he's taking care of her, since he's only doing what she says because it's his job. Shizune reassures her and lets her know that Itsuki doesn't merely stay with her because of his job, and she's sure she'll see that if she waits a bit longer. Hinako feels a little more calm after that, but Shizune admits that this is rare because she has never engaged her for personal advice before. After leaving Hinako's room, Shizune tells herself that she has to stop because it would be inappropriate to develop motherly feelings at this age. Sometime later, after a week of Mireille's lessons, they find the cafe is closed today, so she decides to take him to her family home. Itsuki can't hide his shock when he sees where she lives, because it's over-the-top luxurious and bold. Mireille proudly tells him that's how House Tennoji does things, and she mentions that even the gardens are carefully designed to look beautiful from outside the gate. Itsuki admits that he does find them beautiful, and the inside of the house leaves him even more speechless since it looks like a movie set. Just then, Mireille's father welcomes her home, and she explains to Itsuki that when she said she was having him over, her father insisted on meeting him. Itsuki nervously greets Mireille's father, who introduces himself as Masatsugu Tennoji and asks him to make himself at home. Right after that, he suddenly asks him what his relationship to his daughter is, wanting to know if there's anything else. Mireille quickly interrupts him and clarifies that their relationship is perfectly appropriate. Masatsugu easily trusts in her words and then offers to join them since they're studying table manners. Itsuki is a little terrified by the idea because he has to eat with the head of a national company. He tries his best during the meal, and once they're done, Masatsugu tells him that he's quite capable, since he didn't notice anything in his manners to object to. Mireille tells her father that he's being overly lenient and clarifies that the way Itsuki took his soup was extremely stiff. Masatsugu admits that he seemed a bit nervous, but that's to be expected when dining with the head of the Tennoji group. Itsuki asks him if he has any suggestions for how he can be less nervous, but Masatsugu tells him that everyone's going to be nervous the first time around. Even he struggled with that a lot when he was younger, but that long struggle gradually developed him into the man he is today. Masatsugu tells Itsuki that his past experiences will be there to support him when he needs them most. That's why he shouldn't take failure to heart and just hang tight to his convictions, acting in accordance with them. As they speak, a heavy downpour suddenly begins, so Masatsugu invites Itsuki to spend the night here. Mireille agrees with him because they could hardly turn a guest away in this downpour. Itsuki tells them that he'll consult with his household and then calls Shizune to inform her of the situation. Shizune tells him it should be fine since there is no school tomorrow, but she warns him that Hinako won't like it. Itsuki then proposes something to make it up to her, and the idea he comes up with really surprises Shizune for some reason. Mireille later shows him the room where he'll be staying for the night and tells him that there is a change of clothes in the closet so he can make use of the bathing chamber. Itsuki is surprised that they even have a bathing chamber, and Mireille tells him that they're very proud of it. Soon enough, Itsuki heads there to take a bath, and he's surprised by how luxurious it looks. However, what surprises him more is hearing the voice of a woman who is apparently also taking a bath there. The steam doesn't let him see very well, but Itsuki can only assume that she's Mireille's mother. The woman confirms it and introduces herself as Hanami Tennoji, and she admits that she finds it kind of funny that this is where they meet. Itsuki tries his best to keep his composure despite the situation, and Hanami doesn't even seem to mind, so she just holds a natural conversation with him. He then nervously tells her that he thinks this is the men's side of the bath, and Hanami apparently was genuinely unaware, so he asks her how she can be so unbothered about it. Mireille hears him raising his voice from the other side of the bath, so she asks him if something's wrong. Itsuki quickly tries to tell her that they have a situation here, but Hanami speaks first and apologizes, saying that she got the wrong bath again. Mireille immediately panics and quickly leaves the bath to reach the other side where they are, asking her mother mother to come with her at once. Itsuki instantly looks away when he realizes Mirai is in a towel, and he panics when Hanami suddenly decides to stand up. However, that's when they realize she was wearing a swimsuit the whole time, and she explains that she was swimming in the pool just before. She then scolds Mirai and tells her that she should show more circumspection since she's the one only in a towel. Mirai screams out of embarrassment when she realizes and immediately runs away. Sometime later, she decides to invite Itsuki for some tea, and he can't help but stare at her since her hair looks very different from usual. Mirai confidently assumes that he's enchanted by her appearance, and Itsuki's nervous reaction causes him to burn his tongue with the tea, so the two of them laugh about it. She then tells him that she's really grateful to him because between the tea party and the study groups, her social life at school has been much more fulfilling since meeting him. And as he has proven himself more resilient than he first appeared, being with him has raised her motivation as well. Mirai tells him that if he's able to place above 10th place on the next test, she will hire him as her right hand after graduation. Itsuki clarifies that something like that seems extremely unlikely, but Mirai warns him that if he refuses to have faith in himself, it certainly will be unlikely. Itsuki admits that working with her would probably be a lot of fun because he's learning a lot and enjoying himself now thanks to her, so he'd love to spend his workday like this too. Mirai feels really proud about this, and she even starts imagining how it would be, getting a little ahead of herself. Once she realizes, she quickly stops herself and decides to leave, but before that, she tells him that they must have a slogan, a phrase to raise morale before the big fight, a kind of war cry. Itsuki thinks that's a cute idea, but to his surprise, Mirai's slogan is "Destroy Hinako Konohana," and she even makes him say it, so he silently apologizes to Hinako. The next day, it's finally time for him to leave, so he thanks Mirai's family for their care, and she asks him to feel free to return anytime he wishes. Once he leaves, Masatsugu tells Mirai that she and Itsuki seem quite close, and she doesn't deny it. After all, she now feels that with Itsuki by her side, nothing could stop her. Her father notices her expression and assumes that they're closer than they appear after all, but Mirai gets nervous and quickly reminds him that their relationship is perfectly appropriate. Masatsugu then confesses that he wanted to discuss something with her because he thinks it may be about time to determine her fiancé. This takes Mirai by surprise, so her father explains that there are many people who will try to get close to her seeking the Tennoji family's power, and some may even have ill intent. In order to dissuade such people, it may be best to do this sooner than later, only if she agrees to it, of course. Mirai is a little hesitant at first, but she then asks him if her being affianced will contribute to the Tennoji family. Masatsugu admits that it would make it easier to plan certain things, but that's enough for Mirai to make a decision, so she tells her father that she agrees. When Itsuki finally returns to the Konohana mansion, he apologizes for not having returned last night. Shizune just tells him that they must discard the past and address the present because right now, Hinako is enraged, and he must restore her spirits at once. This intimidates Itsuki a little, but he reminds her of the request he mentioned before on the phone, and Shizune tells him that she has already arranged it. With that settled, Itsuki goes to Hinako's room, and she doesn't even get out of bed to greet him, saying that he was out all night. She's clearly judging him for it, so Itsuki tries to explain himself and tells her that the weather was awful, so he didn't really have a choice but to stay at Mirai's house. Hinako is still not happy at all, so she just tells him that it's a very well-constructed excuse. At this point, Itsuki knows that he's doomed and realizes she's seriously pissed. To his surprise, Hinako asks him to come closer, and then smells his clothes, noticing that his scent is not the usual, which she finds really unsettling. She asks him if he ate with Mirai, and if he took a bath at her house, which Itsuki confirms. Hinako then asks him if he took a bath with her, and the question makes him laugh at first, until he remembers what happened at Mirai's house last night. Hinako immediately notices the pause he makes, and she quickly questions him about it. Itsuki nervously explains that he didn't mean it, and that it's not like he chose to bathe with her. He ends up confessing that it was actually Mirai's mother, but he clarifies that she was just there when he was bathing. Hinako remains calm as she repeats each one of his actions as if they were his crimes, and then asks him if he's Mirai's caretaker. Itsuki quickly denies it and tells her that he's her caretaker, but Hinako grabs him by the shirt and says that he should be with her in that case. She doesn't really think he understands, even though Itsuki assures her that he does. But before they can continue arguing, Shizune informs Hinako that her lunch has been prepared. Hinako leaves without another word, ready to have lunch on her own, as always, though she looks very sad about it. However, Itsuki approaches her at the table to have lunch with her, which really takes her by surprise. Seeing how confused she looks, Shizune informs her that Itsuki will be dining with her today. Itsuki then explains that the agreement was that he wouldn't dine with her until he'd mastered table manners, which is why he asked Mirai to tutor him in table manners especially. He thinks that he's made real progress now, so he asked Shizune to arrange this today. Shizune warns him that this is his final exam, so she'll evaluate his manners for herself. With this in mind, Itsuki takes a seat to dine with Hinako, putting everything he learned at Mirai's house into practice. In no time, Hinako recognizes that he's gotten a lot better, and she's really impressed. Itsuki tells her that he's been working really hard, so Hinako asks Shizune what she thinks now. After seeing Itsuki's performance, Shizune informs him that he has passed the test, which means he's allowed to dine with Hinako from now on. Itsuki is relieved by this, and he tells Hinako that he's hoping to join her for as many meals as he can moving forward. He put a lot of effort into this, this, but now that he has passed the test, Hinako asks him to drop the manners and be chill. Shizune tells him that he's not obligated to maintain etiquette at all times, but she warns him that Kagen may join them in the dining room at times, so he should watch himself. Once that's clear, Hinako asks Itsuki to sit next to her so that they can eat together. She's clearly happier now, so Itsuki easily complies, thinking that just seeing her smile makes it all worthwhile, and he has to thank Mireille for that. The next day, however, he notices how spaced out Mireille is during their studying session. It starts to feel a little concerning, so Itsuki checks on her and Mireille apologizes, saying that she's a bit preoccupied, but it's nothing with which he needs to concern himself. She quickly changes the subject and tells him that she's completed grading his quiz and he scored a 98, which is quite a shame. Itsuki notices his mistake on the quiz and admits it's really frustrating, but at least now he knows what he did wrong. Mireille then moves on to his etiquette lessons and mentions that as her father approved of his performance the other day, she believes they can conclude his instruction in table manners. They take a little break after this, and Itsuki thinks that Mireille really does seem a little down today for some reason. He decides to go outside for some fresh air and ends up casually running into Narika, who tells him that she was feeling out the school about using her family company's products. Itsuki remembers just then that her family makes sporting goods, so he assumes that she's helping them with that. Narika is very proud of that, but she puts that aside and asks him what he's doing here at this hour. Itsuki tells her that he had a study group with Mireille, but this confuses Narika a little, considering midterms are over. She simply assumes that they're pretty serious about studying, and Itsuki reminds her that there's always the next exam, so she'll be in trouble if she doesn't focus too. Narika sees a perfect opportunity, so she excitedly agrees with him and says that she should study as well. Itsuki says goodbye after that though, so Narika immediately stops him, asking him if that wasn't a build-up to him inviting her to join their study group. He clearly was completely clueless, so she gets a little sad and simply assumes that she really is hard to invite to things. Itsuki tries to tell her that it isn't like that, but Narika clarifies that he doesn't have to comfort her, and mentions that she heard her classmates saying the same thing about her the other day. That is actually really sad. So Itsuki explains that he and Mireille had already finished studying for the day, so she was going to teach him etiquette, then they'd share a meal to practice. He asks her if she'd like to join them, but Narika nervously questions him, wanting to know if he really wants someone so hard to invite to join them. Itsuki clarifies that he doesn't think that she's hard to invite, and he's sure Mireille would love to have her too. This makes Narika so happy that it even brings her to tears, so she obviously accepts the invitation. While they're having tea, Itsuki tells her that he stayed at Mireille's house the other night, and this really surprises her, because he keeps getting in close with major families, such as the Konohana family, and now the Tennoji family. She still doesn't know what's going on with him and Hinako anyway, and it now seems like he's pretty friendly with Mireille too. Itsuki mentions that he can see that she's got great table manners as well, though Narika thinks that he's just making fun of her, so she reminds him that she's still a daughter of the Miyakojima family. Their interaction actually makes Mireille laugh for the first time in a while, and she admits that they seem to enjoy each other's company a lot. Itsuki is still worried about her though, so he asks her if something's wrong, and tells her that she can open up to him if she's comfortable with it. Mireille hesitates at first, and then confesses that they've been discussing arranging a marriage for her. Itsuki assumes that's not something she wants, but Mireille clarifies that's not the problem. She explains that as a daughter of the Tennoji family, she always knew this day would come, but it's become real so suddenly that she's feeling rather dazed. Narika easily understands this, because that stuff is basically fate for girls like them. Itsuki asks her if her family has discussed an arranged marriage for her, but Narika denies it and tells him that they've just said it'll happen someday. She quickly clarifies that she'd still rather marry for love if she could, and makes it very clear to him that nothing's been arranged for her yet. Narika calms down and mentions that her parents aren't exactly champing at the bit for it either, and the only time they discussed it, her father told her that she wasn't ready for that yet. Itsuki understands why her father said that, and he just thinks that her parents really know her well, because knowing Narika, her anxiety wouldn't even let her interact with her husband properly. Putting that aside, Mireille asks him what he thinks of the prospect of her engagement, because she really wants to know his opinion. Itsuki tells her that he doesn't know much about the whole arranged marriage thing, but if she finds something that works for her, then he just wishes her the best. Mireille looks kind of sad with this answer, but she smiles anyway, and thanks the two of them for listening to her, saying that they've helped her set some of her worries aside because she's been viewing it in too dire a light. Itsuki lets her know that even if she does get an arranged marriage, he hopes they can still spend time together like before. Mireille keeps a smile on her face, but on her way back home, she can't help but wonder just how dense he can be, because there's no way that can continue after she's been affianced. She also was hoping that he'd said something more about it, especially after what he said that day, when he told her that working with her would probably be a lot of fun. Thinking about that moment makes her feel something strange in her chest, but Mireille has no idea what this feeling is. The next day at school, she reserves the whole gym just for Itsuki and her, because she decided they should begin dancing lessons. The idea makes Itsuki panic a little, because he knows nothing about dancing at all. Mireille tells him that it would be best for him to familiarize himself with the social dances, since it will improve his posture as well. Without wasting more time, Mireille instructs him on what to do, asking him to come closer and to take her right hand with his left, all while keeping his back straight. Itsuki stiffly follows her instructions, placing his right hand on her back around her shoulder blades. Mireille informs him that this is the basic stance stance, also known as a hold, and they must maintain this stance while beginning the dance. Itsuki warns her that he doesn't know how to dance, but Mirai tells him that there are times when one must learn by doing, so he just has to follow her example. Having no other choice, Itsuki follows her lead as they dance, and he doesn't do too bad, so Mirai praises him and says that he appears quite physically gifted. Itsuki admits that he has gotten a few compliments during martial arts lessons, and Mirai tells him that martial arts strengthens both the body and the spirit, so she enjoys her practice herself. They soon return to their practice, but this time Itsuki panics when he notices that Mirai is sweating through her clothes, which lets him see some things he shouldn't. He quickly looks away, but Mirai scolds him and asks him to look at her at once, explaining that dancing isn't merely about the movements of the body, and line of sight and expression are paramount. Itsuki nervously lets her know what the problem is, so Mirai immediately panics and covers herself when she realizes. Once she calms down, she puts on a jacket and continues with the dancing lessons. After a while, they finally finish the lesson, and Mirai tells him that he's a bit high-strung. Due to it being his first time, Itsuki admits that he was pretty nervous, and then asks her if she attends a lot of social dances. Mirai tells him that dinner parties are far more common, but it's the kind of thing there's no harm in learning. Itsuki agrees with her because it really is a lot of fun, and he'd love to dance in front of people someday. Mirai then mentions that once her marriage is arranged, they won't be able to spend time like this after class anymore. After all, once her future husband is arranged, she'll have to dedicate most of her time to him. To her surprise, Itsuki confesses that he'll really miss her, and explains that today reminded him that he has fun doing pretty much anything with her, so he'll miss these times they spend together. Mirai is actually happy to hear that, and her feelings are pretty clear on her face, so she decides to look away from him, hiding her expression. Itsuki wonders if what he said was too forward of him, but Mirai quickly snaps out of it and nervously tells him that it's nothing. However, that night at her house, she's still too happy thinking about his words, because now she knows that she wasn't the only one feeling sad about it. Mirai wonders how she could ensure they can keep on doing it, and she even thinks about inviting him to a position in the Tennoji group so that they can continue seeing each other even after she's engaged. She soon realizes that's a ridiculous thought, but the idea can't leave her mind, and even her mother starts worrying about her because she's been giggling and muttering to herself. Mirai quickly composes herself and tells her that she was just thinking, but Hanami mentions that she can see that she's really been enjoying herself lately. Ever since she started spending time with Itsuki after class, she's practically been skipping through the halls. With that in mind, Hanami asks her if she'd tell her more, wanting to know what Itsuki means to her, since he's clearly had an influence on her dear daughter. Mirai tells her that when they first met, he seemed really insecure, but he proved himself ambitious, and he's been so devoted to academics, etiquette, and today's dance lessons that she can't help but admire him. Mirai confesses that she always enjoys her time with him, most of all, so Hanami tells her that she's found a lovely friend. Mirai agrees, and she almost says that she'd love to continue seeing him, but she quickly corrects herself and says that she hopes her future husband could be someone like him. Her mother can tell that she's pushing herself, so she reminds her that she doesn't need to burden herself beyond what she can take. She knows that she has a tendency to put too much on her shoulders after all, so she wishes she could be more free. Mirai tells her that there's no need to worry, and assures her that she's free, though Hanami doesn't look convinced, but she doesn't question it any further. She then mentions that they've discussed a face-to-face meeting for her arranged matter, so she hopes she can make time for that. Mirai easily agrees, but the next day, she continues helping Itsuki with his dancing lessons, and she looks even more out of it than before. Itsuki is really worried about her, especially when Mirai ends the dancing lessons sooner than usual. She explains that she has plans regarding the arranged marriage, and she's going to meet her possible future husband today. Itsuki asks her if she's not happy about his arranged marriage thing, because she just doesn't seem like herself lately. Mirai tells him that an arranged marriage is necessary, given her position. Itsuki doesn't know what she means by that, so Mirai decides to tell him the truth, confessing that she's adopted. This is clearly a shock for him, and Mirai explains that she was taken in when she was still a baby, so she barely thinks about it, but she's not the true daughter of the Tennoji family. Her mother and father treat her as their own, but the unvarnished truth is that she is not their bloodline. That's why she must try even harder to act as befits the Tennoji family's daughter, because that is her duty. Itsuki quickly asks her if she's just getting engaged out of a sense of duty, and Mirai doesn't deny it, but she clarifies that it's common enough in families like hers. She tells him that her own case is a special example, but she thought he would understand, because she figured he's adopted too. Itsuki soon understands why Mirai once told him that his manners seemed superficially acquired, and why she questioned if he was really the heir to a medium-sized business. Mirai tells him that she intuited it back then, that like her, he felt an obligation to protect his family name. Itsuki knows that she's right that he's protecting a family name, but what she doesn't know is that the family name he's protecting is the Konohana family's, and he's not their adopted child, but just an employee. Revealing the truth to her now would break his promise to the family, so Itsuki has no choice but to play along and make her believe that she's right. He doesn't deny her assumption and asks her to keep this between them, and Mirai gladly agrees, saying that she knew that her intuition wouldn't fail her. She actually looks happy to know that he's like her, so Itsuki feels like his heart is breaking because he can't tell her the truth. He had looked the other way for so long from that sense sense of guilt, but now he can't stop thinking about it. During dinner, even Hinako notices that he's out of it, so he quickly apologizes and asks her what they were talking about. Hinako tells him that they were talking about skipping school tomorrow, though he doesn't think that was it at all. Itsuki doesn't question it and continues to feed her dinner as they speak, and he decides to ask her when she usually studies. Hinako tells him that she studies from when she gets back until dinner, and sometimes they make her do some after too. She clarifies that it's not just school stuff, but also family business, because she needs to know the Konohana Group portfolio so she can keep up at dinners and stuff. Without thinking, Itsuki asks her if she ever gets sick of it, though he quickly takes it back and apologizes, knowing that it was kind of rude to ask that. He explains that he was just wondering how she feels about her duties as the Konohana family heiress. Hinako thinks about it for a moment and says that she doesn't like when people get sad because of her, so sometimes she feels like she'd better work hard, though she thinks the family stuff is a real drag sometimes. She confesses that's why she was really happy when he came here, because it made her realize there was more to her world than the Konohana family. Itsuki continues thinking about that answer for the rest of the night, wondering if Mirai knew that there was a world outside the Tennoji family too.